The first bullet tore through Ryder Vance's shoulder before he even heard the shot. The second one shattered the wooden beam beside his head, sending splinters into his cheek like angry wasps. He hit the saloon floor hard, tasting dust and blood, his vision blurring as boots thundered around him and gunfire erupted in waves that made his skull ring like a church bell. Someone was screaming. Maybe it was him. Hard to tell when the world was ending. "Get down! Get the hell down!" Ryder rolled behind an overturned table, clutching his revolver with fingers that had gone slick with his own blood. His gang, what was left of it, was spread across the Silver Dollar Saloon like broken toys, some firing wildly through the windows, others already sprawled on the floorboards in positions no living man could hold. Marshall Harding's voice boomed from outside, amplified by rage and righteousness. "Vance, you're surrounded! Come out with your hands up, or we burn you out!" Ryder's laugh came out wet and ragged. Surrounded. Of course they were surrounded. That's what happened when you tried to rob the county's largest cattle auction with a crew of 6 men against 40 armed citizens, 3 deputy marshals, and apparently every rancher within 50 miles who'd been itching for an excuse to shoot someone. Brilliant planning, Ryder. Real genius work. Beside him, Tommy Reeves, youngest of the gang at 19, pressed both hands against the hole in his gut, his face already going gray. "Ryder," he gasped. "Ryder, I can't feel my legs." "You're going to be fine, kid." The lie tasted like ashes. "Just keep your head down." Another volley of gunfire punched through the saloon's walls, turning the afternoon light into daggers of gold dust brilliance. Glass shattered. Someone howled. The smell of gunpowder and spilled whiskey mixed with something worse. The copper penny stink of blood and the acrid bite of fear sweat. Across the room, Big Jack Morrison took a round through the throat and went down choking, his massive hands clawing at nothing. Frank, the knife. Dalton got halfway to the back door before 3 shots stitched across his spine and folded him like a bad poker hand. 4 men down, 2 left standing. Well, 1 standing, 1 bleeding behind furniture. Ryder's mind raced through possibilities like a card sharp counting odds. The back door was a death trap. They'd have it covered. The windows were suicide. The cellar? Maybe, if they could. The front door exploded inward. Not opened. Exploded. Someone had put a shotgun blast straight through the lock, and now the door hung on twisted hinges like a broken jaw. Daylight flooded in, silhouetting 3 figures with rifles raised. "Drop your weapons!" Marshall Harding stepped into the saloon, his silver badge catching the light like a small, judgmental sun. "Last chance, Vance." Ryder looked at his revolver. 4 rounds left. Maybe 5 if he'd counted wrong. Not enough. Not nearly enough. He looked at Tommy, whose breathing had gone shallow and quick. He looked at Carl Deadeye Patterson, the last man standing, whose hands were shaking so bad his rifle barrel was drawing figure 8s in the air. And Ryder Vance, the man who'd robbed 12 banks, held up 7 stagecoaches, and once walked out of a Kansas City jail in broad daylight, did something he'd never done before. He dropped his gun. The metal hit the floorboards with a sound like the closing of a book. Final. Absolute. Smart choice. Harding moved forward, his men fanning out behind him. "Hands where I can see them, nice and slow." Ryder raised his hands, feeling blood run down his arm and drip from his fingertips. The shoulder wound was bad, probably took a chunk of bone with it, but he'd survive. Probably. Maybe. They hauled him to his feet roughly, and the world tilted sideways. Pain exploded through his shoulder like someone had shoved a red-hot poker through the muscle. He bit down on a scream and tasted blood from where he'd bitten through his lip. "Ryder Vance," Harding said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You're under arrest for bank robbery, murder, theft, and being generally too stupid to live." That last part wasn't official, but it felt true enough. They dragged him outside, and the afternoon sun hit him like a fist. Ryder squinted against the brightness, his boots catching on the saloon's threshold, his legs barely holding his weight. The street was packed. Not just lawmen, everyone. Townspeople lined both sides of the dusty main road, pressed shoulder to shoulder, craning their necks for a better view. Men in work clothes and Sunday suits, women in calico dresses with their hands over their mouths, children hoisted onto their fathers' shoulders, pointing and staring. A crowd gathered for an execution that hadn't happened yet. "There he is!" someone shouted. "There's the famous Ryder Vance!" Someone else laughed. The sound spread like a disease. "That's him? That's the big bad outlaw? Looks half dead already. Without his gang, he ain't nothing." More laughter. Ryder's jaw tightened. His vision swam, and for a moment he thought he might pass out right there in the street, which would only make it worse. Ryder Vance, the outlaw who couldn't even stand up for his own arrest. They shoved him toward a waiting wagon, the kind they used to transport prisoners and livestock, with iron bars and a smell like old hay and desperation. His boots scraped in the dirt. Blood dripped from his shoulder, leaving a trail like breadcrumbs. "Easy," Ryder muttered. "I'm cooperating." "Shut up." One of the deputies, a kid who couldn't have been more than 22, with peach fuzz on his chin and murder in his eyes, jabbed him with a rifle barrel. "You killed 3 men today. You don't get to talk." 3 men. Ryder tried to remember their faces, their names. Citizens who'd grabbed rifles when the shooting started. Fathers, maybe. Husbands. Men who'd woken up this morning thinking today was just another day. "Sorry," he thought, but the word felt empty even inside his own head. They threw him in the wagon cage like a sack of grain. His wounded shoulder hit the bars, and this time he did scream, a raw animal sound that made the crowd go quiet for just a second before the murmuring started up again. Look at him. Pathetic. They say he used to be something. Hard to believe now. The Vance gang's finished, and good riddance. Through the bars, Ryder could see them. A sea of faces, none friendly, all eager to witness his downfall. His humiliation. His end. And there, being led out in chains behind him, was Carl Patterson. Dead-eye. The only other survivor. His face was pale, his eyes empty. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Tommy Reeves didn't come out at all. The wagon lurched into motion, wheels creaking, horses snorting. Ryder grabbed the bars to steady himself, his shoulder screaming protest, and watched the town of Copperhead Falls recede behind him. He'd come here to make a name for himself, to prove that even without a full crew, Ryder Vance was still dangerous, still relevant, still someone. Instead, he'd proven exactly what the world already suspected. Without his gang, he was nothing but a has-been desperado with more pride than sense. The newspapers would have a field day with this. Well, they locked him in the Copperhead Falls jailhouse, a squat brick building that smelled like piss and regret. The cell was maybe 6 by 8, with a cot that had seen better decades, and a bucket in the corner that hadn't been emptied in living memory. Doc Patterson, no relation to Deadeye, came to dig the bullet out of Ryder's shoulder while 2 deputies stood watch with rifles. The doctor was 70 if he was a day, with hands that shook like autumn leaves and breath that could strip paint. "This is gonna hurt," Doc said, threading a needle with what looked like fishing line. "It already hurts." "Then it's gonna hurt more." He wasn't wrong. Ryder bit down on a leather strap and tried not to pass out while the old man probed the wound with tweezers that felt like they'd been borrowed from the devil's personal toolkit. Every nerve in his shoulder sang hymns of agony. Sweat poured down his face. His vision grayed at the edges. "Got it," Doc announced, holding up a misshapen chunk of lead. "Bone fragments, too. You're lucky. 1/4 inch to the left, and this would have hit the artery. You'd have bled out in that saloon." "Lucky," Ryder repeated, his voice hoarse. "That's me. Born under a fortunate star." Doc stitched him up, 17 stitches, each one a fresh new definition of pain. Then wrapped the wound in bandages that smelled like carbolic acid and old newspapers. "Keep it clean," he said. "Change the dressing every day, and try not to get shot again. I'll add it to my list of goals." After the doc left, Ryder lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling, which was decorated with water stains that looked like the map of a country he'd never visit. His shoulder throbbed in time with his heartbeat. His pride hurt worse. Through the small barred window, he could hear the town going about its business. Horses, wagons, voices raised in conversation and commerce. Life continuing as if the day's violence had been nothing more than a momentary interruption. And somewhere out there, the newspapers were already composing his epitaph. The Copperhead Falls Gazette hit the streets the next morning. Marshal Harding brought a copy to Ryder's cell personally, his face split with a grin that showed too many teeth. Thought you might want to read about yourself, he said, sliding the paper through the bars. Ryder took it with his good hand, his wounded arm still bound close to his chest in a sling Doc had fashioned from what looked like an old pillowcase. The headline ran in letters big enough to read from across the street. Vance Gang Destroyed. Infamous Outlaw Captured Alive. Below it, a smaller subheading. Without his crew, Ryder Vance proved to be nothing but a common thug. Ryder's jaw clenched. He read on. Yesterday afternoon, the notorious Vance Gang met their end in Copperhead Falls, their attempted robbery of the cattleman's bank, resulting in a shootout that left 4 outlaws dead and 3 innocent citizens murdered in cold blood. Ryder Vance, the gang's leader, was captured alive after surrendering like a coward when faced with Marshal Tom Harding's superior force. Sources describe Vance as pathetic and hardly the fearsome outlaw of legend. He was nothing without his gang, said Deputy Marshal James Cooper. Just another 2-bit criminal who got lucky for a while. His luck ran out. The surviving gang member, Carl Patterson, is also in custody. Both men face hanging for their crimes. The capture of Ryder Vance marks the end of a criminal enterprise that has plagued our territories for nearly 3 years. Good citizens can rest easier knowing these villains have been brought to justice. Ryder read it twice, then a third time, each pass making his blood boil hotter. Pathetic. Coward. Nothing without his gang. He crumpled the newspaper and threw it across the cell, where it bounced off the bars and landed in a sad, defeated heap. Touching, ain't it? Harding leaned against the wall outside the cell, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. You're famous, Vance. Infamous, I mean, though not quite the way you wanted. Go to hell. Already been, didn't care for it. Harding's grin widened. You know what the best part is? In 2 weeks, maybe 3, they're going to hang you, and nobody's going to remember your name 6 months after that. You'll just be another dead outlaw who thought he was special. Ryder stared at the marshal, his good hand curling into a fist. I wouldn't count on that hanging, he said quietly. Oh? Harding raised an eyebrow. You planning on sprouting wings and flying out of here? I'm planning on being underestimated. Seems to be going well so far. The marshal's smile faltered just a fraction, there and gone, like a candle flame in a draft. Then he laughed, loud and false. You do that, Vance. You plan all you want. See where it gets you. He walked away, his boots echoing on the stone floor, leaving Ryder alone with his thoughts and his rage. 3 days passed in a haze of pain and humiliation. The doctor came back to check his shoulder. The wound was healing, slowly, grudgingly, but healing. The fever that had seized him the second night broke on the third morning, leaving him weak and hollow-eyed but clear-headed for the first time since the shooting. They fed him twice a day, thin soup and hard bread that tasted like sawdust. Ryder ate it anyway, forcing down every bite, because a man couldn't escape on an empty stomach. And he would escape. Somehow. Some way. The alternative was unthinkable. On the 4th day, they brought him a visitor. Ryder was dozing on the cot when he heard footsteps approaching, lighter than the deputy's heavy tread, more hesitant. He opened his eyes to find a young man standing outside his cell, holding a covered basket and looking at him with an expression Ryder couldn't quite read. The kid was maybe 18, 19 at most. Slight build, dark hair that needed cutting, brown eyes that seemed too old for his face. He wore simple clothes, work pants and a patched shirt, and moved with a kind of careful quietness, like someone used to going unnoticed. Who are you? Ryder sat up, ignoring the throb in his shoulder. The young man didn't answer. He just stood there, staring. I asked you a question. Still nothing. The kid set the basket down and pushed it through the slot at the bottom of the cell door where they usually passed food. Then he straightened up and met Ryder's gaze directly. For a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, though of what, Ryder couldn't say. Deputy! The kid called out, and Ryder realized with a start that it was the first sound he'd made. His voice was rough, unused, like an old door opening after years of being sealed shut. Deputy Cooper appeared from the front office, looking annoyed. What? The young man pointed at the basket, then at Ryder, then walked away without another word. Cooper watched him go with an expression of mild disgust. Damn mute, he muttered. Never could stand that boy. Who is he? Caleb Rowe. Town errand boy. Does odd jobs, delivers things, cleans up. Cooper shrugged. His ma runs the boarding house. Kid hasn't spoken a full sentence in his life. Born simple, they say. He just spoke. What? No, he didn't. Caleb don't talk, never has. But Ryder had heard him, clear as a bell. Deputy. One word, but spoken with purpose. Interesting. After Cooper left, Ryder examined the basket. Inside was fresh bread, still warm, a jar of what looked like honey, some cold chicken, and a small canteen of water that didn't taste like rust for once. Better food than the jail had been providing. Much better. Ryder ate slowly, savoring each bite, and thought about the young man with the old eyes who didn't speak but clearly could. Caleb Rowe. Errand boy. Simple, they said. But those eyes hadn't looked simple. They'd looked sharp. Amount. The days blurred together after that. More newspapers arrived, each one worse than the last. The Territorial Times ran a political cartoon showing Ryder as a small, weeping child being spanked by a giant representation of justice. The Denver Daily published an editorial calling for his immediate execution before he wastes any more of the taxpayers' money on room and board. Ryder read them all, feeding the rage that burned in his chest like a coal that wouldn't go out. Pathetic. Washed up. Nothing without his gang. They'd see. Somehow, some way, they'd all see. Caleb came back twice more, once with medicine for Ryder's shoulder that the doc had apparently forgotten to leave, and once with a razor and soap. Deputy says you smell like a dead dog, Caleb had said, actually said, in that rough, seldom-used voice, before Cooper shouted at him to hurry up. Each time, the kid moved with that same careful efficiency, never lingering, never making eye contact longer than necessary, always playing the role of the invisible errand boy. But Ryder noticed things. He noticed how Caleb's eyes took in everything, the cell's dimensions, the lock mechanism, the deputy's routines. He noticed how the kid's hands, though calloused from work, moved with a kind of precision that spoke of intelligence, not simplicity. He noticed how, when Caleb thought no one was watching, his expression shifted from dull compliance to something much more alert. On the seventh day, Ryder tested a theory. When Caleb came with the evening meal, better food again, smuggled in somehow, Ryder waited until Cooper's attention was elsewhere, then spoke quietly. You're not simple, are you? Caleb's hand stilled for just a moment on the basket. Then he continued his work, expression blank. They think you are, Ryder continued, keeping his voice low. The whole town thinks you're a harmless idiot who can't string two words together. But I've seen you. You're watching, learning. Caleb pushed the basket through the slot, then straightened up. For a moment, their eyes met, and the kid smiled, just a flicker, there and gone, but real. Then he turned and walked away, shuffling his feet like someone who couldn't quite coordinate his limbs properly, playing the part perfectly. Ryder leaned back against the wall, a slow grin spreading across his face despite the pain in his shoulder and the weight of the chains on his future. Maybe, just maybe, he'd found something useful. The trial was set for 2 weeks after his arrest. Not that it would be much of a trial, more of a formality before the hanging. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses numerous, and public opinion had already convicted him a dozen times over. Marshal Harding made sure Ryder knew the score. Judge Blackwood's coming up from Santa Fe, he said, visiting the cell on the 9th day with another newspaper and a fresh helping of smug satisfaction. Hanging judge, they call him. Hasn't let a man walk free in 14 years on the bench. Sounds like a real humanitarian. Sounds like justice to me. Harding tossed the paper through the bars. Your friend made the news again. Ryder picked up the paper, his shoulder protesting only mildly now. The wound was healing well, despite everything. The headline read, Second Vance gang member dead. Patterson succumbs to wounds. Carl Deadeye Patterson, the only other survivor of the Vance gang's failed robbery attempt, died yesterday evening from infection related to his bullet wounds. He will be buried in the Potter's Field tomorrow at dawn. This leaves Ryder Vance as the sole surviving member of his once-feared criminal enterprise. His trial is scheduled for next Thursday, with hanging to follow swiftly upon conviction. Ryder stared at the words until they blurred together. Carl was dead. Tommy was dead. Big Jack, Frank, all of them, dead or dying. The Vance gang, which had terrorized the territories for 3 years, which had pulled off robberies from Kansas to Colorado, which had escaped more lawmen than Ryder could count, gone. Erased. Reduced to a cautionary tale about ambition and stupidity. And Ryder Vance, the man who'd built it all, was about to be hanged as a footnote to his own story. "Any last words?" Harding asked, his tone mocking. Ryder looked up at the marshal, his expression flat and cold. "Yeah," he said. "I'm not dead yet." "No," Harding agreed, his smile sharp as broken glass. "But you will be soon, real soon." "What?" That night, Ryder couldn't sleep. He lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the jail settling around him. Cooper's snoring from the front office, the scritch-scratch of mice in the walls, the distant howl of a coyote somewhere out in the darkness. His shoulder ached. His wrists were raw from the shackles they put on whenever he was moved. His future was a noose and a drop, and then nothing. But his mind was working, calculating, planning. He thought about Caleb Rowe, the invisible boy who wasn't quite as invisible as everyone thought. He thought about the trial, the guards, the routines he'd observed through the small window of his cell. He thought about second chances and how rare they were, and how a man had to make his own luck when the world stopped dealing fair hands. Somewhere around midnight, Ryder Vance made a decision. If they were going to hang him anyway, he had nothing to lose by trying to escape. And if he was going to escape, he needed help from someone no one would suspect, someone invisible, someone underestimated. The plan began to take shape in his mind, fragile as spun glass, dangerous as dynamite, but possible, just barely possible. Ryder smiled in the darkness, and for the first time since the shooting, felt something other than rage and despair. He felt hope. Dangerous thing, hope. It could get a man killed, but without it, he was dead anyway. The next morning, when Caleb came with breakfast, Ryder was ready. He waited until the kid approached the cell, waited until Cooper was distracted by something in the front office, and then spoke quietly, urgently. "I need your help." Caleb's expression didn't change, but his hands paused on the basket. "I know you understand me," Ryder continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're smarter than they think, and I know you've got reasons to hate this town as much as I do." The kid's eyes flicked toward him, cautious, measuring. "In 3 days, they're putting me on trial. A week after that, maybe less, they'll hang me." Ryder leaned closer to the bars. "But I'm not planning on being here for either, and I think you might not want to be here much longer either." Caleb set the basket down slowly. He glanced toward the front office where Cooper was still occupied, then back at Ryder. And then, so quietly that Ryder almost missed it, he spoke. "What do you want?" 2 words. But they changed everything. Ryder grinned, a wolf's grin, all teeth and hunger. "I want out, and I think you want out too. Out of this town, out of this life, out of being treated like you're nothing." Caleb's expression shifted, something flickering behind his eyes like lightning in distant clouds. "What makes you think I'll help you?" "Because we're the same, you and me." Ryder kept his voice low, intense. "The world's already decided who we are, what we're worth, and they're wrong, dead wrong." For a long moment, Caleb just stared at him. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper. He glanced at the front office again, then pushed the paper through the bars. "Read it later," Caleb whispered, "when you're alone." Then he grabbed the basket and walked away, his gait that same shuffling, uncertain movement, his expression blank and vacant again. But Ryder had seen the intelligence behind those eyes, the calculation, the hunger for something more. After Cooper let Caleb out and returned to his desk, Ryder unfolded the paper with his good hand, angling it to catch the light from the window. The handwriting was small, precise, educated. "They think I'm stupid because I don't waste words on people who don't listen. They think you're finished because they saw you fall. Maybe we can prove them wrong. Maybe we can't. But I'd rather die trying than live being invisible. If you're serious, tomorrow night." Second watch. Cooper falls asleep around midnight. I can get you out of the cell. After that, You're on your own unless you take me with you. Your choice. See, Ryder read it 3 times, then tucked it under his mattress, his heart pounding. Tomorrow night, one chance, maybe their only chance. He thought about the risks, for himself, for the kid. Thought about what would happen if they failed. Thought about how the newspapers would savage him even worse if he was caught trying to escape like a common criminal. Then he thought about the noose, about the jeering crowds, about dying as the punchline to someone else's joke. Ryder Vance had been a lot of things in his 32 years: outlaw, killer, thief, leader of men. But he'd never been someone else's joke, and he wasn't about to start now. Tomorrow night, he'd either escape or die trying. And if that quiet kid with the sharp eyes wanted to come along for the ride, well, Ryder had a feeling they might just surprise everyone, including themselves. The sun set over Copperhead Falls, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, and Ryder Vance began counting down the hours to either freedom or death. Either way, the world was about to learn something important. You could knock a man down. You could humiliate him, mock him, bury his reputation and dance on the grave. But you couldn't kill his will to survive. Not completely, not ever. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Ryder spent the day forcing himself to appear defeated, slumped on the cot, barely touching his food, staring at nothing with the vacant expression of a man who'd given up. Cooper bought it completely, even commenting to another deputy that the fight's gone out of him finally. Good. Let them think that. When the sun finally set and the jail settled into its evening routine, Ryder's pulse began to quicken despite his efforts to stay calm. He watched through the small window as darkness claimed the town, watched the oil lamps flicker to life in windows across Copperhead Falls, watched the last few citizens hurry home before the streets emptied. Deputy Marshal Cooper took the second watch as usual, settling into his chair with a bottle of whiskey and yesterday's newspaper. By 10 o'clock, he'd made it halfway through the bottle. By 11, his eyes were drooping. Midnight came and went. Cooper's chin dropped to his chest. His breathing deepened, regularized. The newspaper slipped from his fingers and whispered to the floor. Ryder waited, every muscle tense, his injured shoulder throbbing in time with his heartbeat. 15 minutes passed. 20. Then, so quietly Ryder almost missed it, the jail's front door opened. Caleb Rowe slipped inside like smoke, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for someone supposedly clumsy and simple-minded. He wore dark clothes, practical, worn, ready for travel. A pack was slung across his shoulders. He moved directly to Cooper's desk, his eyes on the sleeping deputy, and began searching the drawers with practiced efficiency. His hands found the cell keys within seconds. No fumbling, no hesitation. He knew exactly where they were kept. Ryder stood, gripping the bars, watching as Caleb approached the cell with footsteps that made no sound at all on the stone floor. Their eyes met through the bars. Caleb raised one finger to his lips. Unnecessary, but the gesture was clear enough, then fitted the key into the lock. The mechanism turned with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the quiet jail. The cell door swung open. Freedom, after 10 days of captivity, felt like ice water on burned skin, shocking and vital all at once. "Your shoulder," Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible. "Can you ride?" "I can do whatever I have to do." Caleb nodded, then moved back to Cooper's desk. He retrieved Ryder's gun belt, confiscated and stored in a locked drawer, and tossed it to him. Ryder caught it one-handed, his fingers finding the familiar weight of his Colt revolver, like greeting an old friend. "There's 2 horses behind the jail," Caleb said, still keeping his voice to a whisper. "Saddled and ready. Food and water for 3 days. I wasn't sure you'd say yes, but I planned anyway." Ryder stared at the kid, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not simple, not helpless, prepared. Thinking ahead. "You've been planning this for a while." "I've been planning to leave for 2 years, Caleb replied, his eyes hard. "You just gave me a reason to do it tonight instead of next month." Cooper stirred in his chair, mumbling something incoherent. Both men froze. The deputy's hand moved toward his holster in a reflexive gesture, then fell away. His breathing evened out again. "We need to move," Caleb breathed. "Now!" They crossed to the back door, locked, but Caleb had a key for that too. How he'd gotten copies of the jail's keys, Ryder didn't ask. There'd be time for questions later. Maybe. The door opened onto an alley shrouded in darkness. Two horses stood waiting, their reins tied to a post, their saddles gleaming dully in the moonlight. Good animals, not the fastest Ryder had ever seen, but sturdy, well-fed, ready for hard travel. "Where'd you get these?" Ryder asked as he approached the nearest horse, a bay gelding with intelligent eyes. "Borrowed them." Borrowed. "The Hendersons won't notice they're gone until morning." Caleb was already mounting the second horse, a gray mare. "They've got 6 horses and can't count past 5 on a good day." Despite everything, the danger, the absurdity, the sheer recklessness of what they were doing, Ryder almost laughed. He hauled himself into the saddle, his shoulder screaming protest, fresh blood seeping through the bandages beneath his shirt. The world tilted sideways for a moment, gray spots dancing in his vision, but he gritted his teeth and held on. "You all right?" Caleb's voice cut through the haze. "I'm fine. Which way?" "East, toward the Badlands. They'll expect us to run west toward Colorado, so we go the opposite direction." Smart. Ryder was liking this kid more by the minute. They urged the horses into motion, keeping to the alleys behind the main street, avoiding the few lit windows still showing signs of life. A dog barked somewhere, once, twice, then fell silent. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, dark and concealing. They'd made it 3 blocks when someone shouted, "Hey, hey! Someone's in the alley!" Ryder cursed and kicked his horse into a gallop. Pain exploded through his shoulder, but he held on, leaning low over the animal's neck as it surged forward. Beside him, Caleb matched his pace, his face set in concentration. More shouts erupted behind them. A bell began clanging. The alarm bell, probably from the jail. Cooper must have woken up. "Ryder Vance has escaped! Ryder Vance is loose!" Gunfire cracked through the night. A bullet whined past Ryder's ear close enough to feel the displacement of air. Another kicked up dirt from the street ahead. They burst out of the alley onto the main road. No choice now, stealth was finished, and thundered east toward the edge of town. Windows lit up on both sides. Men appeared with rifles. More shots rang out, a chaotic symphony of violence that chased them like hornets. The town limits appeared ahead, just a sign and a fence line and then open country beyond. Almost there. A rifle shot caught Caleb's horse in the rear flank. The animal screamed and stumbled, nearly throwing its rider. Caleb held on with the skill of someone who'd grown up around horses, but the mare was limping badly now, losing speed with every stride. "Go!" Caleb shouted. "Don't wait for me!" Like hell. Ryder yanked his horse around, rode back toward Caleb even as more bullets stitched the air around them. He extended his good arm. "Grab on!" "There's no time. Grab on or I'll leave you to hang beside me." Caleb reached out, their hands locked, and Ryder pulled with everything he had. His shoulder felt like it was tearing apart, but he held on, dragging Caleb from the wounded mare and across the back of his own horse. The bay gelding grunted under the extra weight, but didn't falter. Good animal. Ryder would steal it a second time if he had to. They cleared the town limits doing maybe 30 miles an hour, both men clinging to the saddle, the horse breathing hard but still running. Behind them, Copperhead Falls exploded into activity, men mounting up, forming a posse, preparing to give chase. But they had a head start now. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe less. It would have to be enough. They rode hard for an hour, following the road east until Caleb tapped Ryder's shoulder and pointed north toward a dry riverbed cutting through the scrubland. "Down there," he said, his voice raised to be heard over the hoofbeats. "We can lose them in the rocks." Ryder guided the horse down the embankment, the animal sliding on loose shale, its hooves scrabbling for purchase. They hit the bottom and turned up the riverbed, following its winding course deeper into the Badlands. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, then faded altogether. They rode until the horse was stumbling with exhaustion, and Ryder's shoulder had gone from screaming pain to a dull, nauseating throb that made him want to vomit. Only then did Caleb call for a stop. They found shelter in an overhang carved into the riverbank by centuries of flash floods. The space was maybe 8 feet deep and wide enough for the horse and both men. Not comfortable, but hidden. Ryder half fell from the saddle, his legs nearly buckling when they hit the ground. Caleb caught him, steadied him, helped him to a sitting position against the rock wall. Let me see the shoulder, Caleb said. It's fine. It's bleeding through your shirt. Let me see it. Too tired to argue, Ryder let the kid peel away the blood-soaked fabric. The bandages underneath were saturated, and when Caleb carefully unwound them, Ryder could see that several stitches had torn during the ride. Hell, he muttered. Could be worse.
Baan potat sit George.
Caleb dug through his pack and produced a surprisingly well-stocked medical kit. Bandages, carbolic acid, thread, and needle. This is gonna hurt. Everything hurts, just do it. Caleb worked with steady hands and surprising gentleness, cleaning the wound, re-stitching the torn areas, wrapping fresh bandages. He'd clearly done this before. Ryder wondered what kind of life the kid had led that taught him field medicine. Where'd you learn to do that? Ryder asked through gritted teeth. My mother runs the boarding house. We get a lot of people coming through, cowboys, miners, drifters. Some of them show up hurt. Doctors cost money. Caleb tied off the last bandage. I learned by watching and doing. Your mother know you can talk? Caleb's hands paused for just a moment. She knows. But she also knows it's safer if the town thinks I'm simple. People ignore you when they think you're stupid. They talk around you like you're not even there. And you learn things. I learn everything. Caleb sat back, studying his work. That should hold if you don't do anything stupid like wrestling a bear. I'll try to restrain myself. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. The horse cropping at sparse grass, the distant yip of coyotes, the wind moving through the rocks with a sound like whispered secrets. Finally, Ryder spoke. Why'd you help me? Caleb didn't answer immediately. He stared out at the darkness beyond their shelter, his profile sharp against the faint starlight. You asked me if I wanted out, he said eventually. Out of the town. Out of being invisible. You were right. I've been invisible my whole life. The quiet kid, the simple one. The errand boy who doesn't matter. So you broke me out of jail. I broke us both out. Caleb turned to look at him, and even in the dim light, Ryder could see the intensity in his eyes. They were going to hang you, and I was going to spend the rest of my life being nobody. At least this way, we've got a chance. A chance at what? We're fugitives now, both of us. They'll hunt us down like dogs. Maybe. Caleb's expression didn't change. But at least they'll know we existed. At least we won't die invisible. Ryder studied the kid, really looked at him, seeing past the worn clothes and the young face to the steel underneath. Caleb Rowe had made a choice tonight that most men twice his age wouldn't have the courage to make. He'd thrown away his entire life on the slim hope that something better waited on the other side of this desperate gamble. Either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Ryder still hadn't decided which. What's your plan? He asked, assuming we survive the next few days. I don't have one. That's your department. Caleb pulled a canteen from his pack and took a long drink before offering it to Ryder. You're the famous outlaw. I'm just the kid who helped you escape. Famous, Ryder repeated bitterly. You read the newspapers. I'm a joke. A has-been desperado who got lucky for a while. The newspapers lie. They tell the truth this time. My gang's dead. My reputation's destroyed. I've got a bullet wound in my shoulder and every lawman in 3 territories hunting me. Ryder took the canteen, drank, tasted water that was cold and clean and tasted like freedom. Some outlaw. But you're alive, Caleb said quietly, and you got out. That's more than most men in your situation could manage. We got out. Couldn't have done it without you. Caleb ducked his head, maybe embarrassed, maybe pleased. Hard to tell in the darkness. They passed the canteen back and forth, sharing the water, neither speaking. The horse dozed on its feet. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. After a while, Caleb broke the silence. What happened? At the bank, I mean. Everyone says you just walked in with 6 men and got massacred. Ryder's jaw tightened. The memory was still fresh, still raw. It was supposed to be simple, he said. Cattle auction day, lots of cash moving through the bank, lots of confusion, perfect time to strike. We'd done it a dozen times before in other towns. In and out, 5 minutes, nobody gets hurt if they're smart. What went wrong? Everything. Ryder stared at his hands, seeing blood that wasn't there anymore. Someone tipped off the marshal. We never found out who. They were waiting for us. The whole damn town was waiting. It wasn't a robbery, it was an ambush. Why didn't you run? Pride. The word tasted like ashes. Stupid suicidal pride. I thought we could shoot our way out. I thought... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong, and 6 good men died because of it. Were they good men? Ryder considered the question. Tommy, who'd joined the gang at 17 because his father beat him and there was nowhere else to go. Big Jack, who sent half his take to his sister's family in Kansas City every month. Frank, who could make anyone laugh even when things were darkest. Good enough, he said. Better than they had to be. Better than I deserved. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then asked, So what now? Now we survive. Day by day, mile by mile. We stay ahead of the posse, find some place to hole up, figure out our next move. Ryder met the kid's eyes. That good enough for you? For now. Caleb pulled a piece of jerky from his pack and tore it in half, offering one piece to Ryder. But eventually we're going to need money, food, supplies. Can't run forever on stolen horses and borrowed time. I know. Which means we're going to have to take some risks. I know that too. Ryder chewed the jerky slowly, his stomach cramping around the first real food it had seen in days. You having second thoughts? No. Caleb's answer came quick and certain. You? Kid, I've had nothing but second thoughts since the moment I woke up in that jail cell. But second thoughts don't change reality. We're in this now, all the way in. Good. Caleb settled back against the rock wall, his eyes already drifting closed. Wake me in 3 hours. I'll take second watch. You don't have to. Wake me in 3 hours, Caleb repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Ryder watched the kid fall asleep with the easy unconsciousness of youth, his breathing evening out almost immediately. 18 years old, maybe 19, and already harder than most men Ryder had known. Life did that sometimes, forced you to grow up fast or not at all. The night deepened around them. Ryder sat with his back against stone, still warm from the day's sun, his revolver in his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. None came. Maybe they'd lost the posse in the Badlands. Maybe the searchers had given up for the night, planning to resume at dawn. Maybe they were out there right now, closing in silently, waiting for first light to spring their trap. No way to know. No way to do anything except wait and watch and hope. Hours passed. The moon rose, painting the landscape in shades of silver and shadow. Ryder's shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, but the pain was manageable now, familiar. He'd ridden with worse wounds before. When 3 hours had crawled by, Ryder gently shook Caleb awake. The kid came alert instantly, his hand moving toward a knife at his belt before his eyes focused, and he recognized where he was. Easy, Ryder said. Just your watch. Caleb nodded, scrubbed his hands over his face, stood up and stretched. Anything? Nothing. Either we lost them or they're waiting for daylight. Probably waiting. Caleb checked the horse, then took up position at the edge of their shelter, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. Get some sleep. You look like death. Feel like it too. Ryder settled into the spot Caleb had vacated, the rock still warm with body heat. Wake me if anything moves. I will. Sleep came faster than Ryder expected, dragging him down into dreams that were half memory, half nightmare. The saloon, the shooting, Tommy's face as the light left his eyes, the crowd laughing as they hauled him to the jail. And then, stranger, a dream of riding through endless desert under a sky that had no sun, with Caleb beside him and something chasing them that he couldn't see but could feel getting closer with every stride. He woke to Caleb's hand on his good shoulder and dawn breaking over the Badlands in streaks of crimson and gold. Company, Caleb said quietly, pointing east. Ryder scrambled up, ignoring his body's protests, and followed the kid's gaze. A mile away, maybe less, dust rose from the riverbed, riders, at least 6 of them, moving in a methodical search pattern. How long? Ryder asked. Spotted them 5 minutes ago. They're moving slow, checking every outcrop and overhang. Which means they'll be here in 20 minutes, maybe less. Ryder turned to the horse, began tightening the saddle. We need to move. Where? They're between us and the only cover for miles. Ryder looked around, his mind racing. The riverbed continued north for another mile before it opened onto flat land. No cover, nowhere to hide. South led back toward town. East and west were exposed scrubland where they'd be visible for miles. They were trapped. Ideas? Caleb asked, his voice steady despite the situation. Because my expertise was getting us out of jail, not evading professional manhunters. Ryder's eyes fell on the horse, then on Caleb's pack, then on the overhang above them, where centuries of erosion had created a lip of rock that jutted out over the riverbed. How attached are you to that horse? He asked. Not very. Why? Because we're about to make them think we kept running. Ryder began stripping the saddle off the bay gelding. Help me with this. Working quickly, they pulled everything off the horse, saddle, blanket, bridle, and stuffed it all into the shadows at the back of the overhang. Then Ryder slapped the animal hard on the rump. Go! Get! The horse bolted, galloping north up the riverbed, its hoofbeats echoing off the rocks. Now what? Caleb asked. Now we climb. Ryder pointed to a narrow crack in the rock face beside the overhang, barely wide enough for a man but climbable if you were desperate enough. Up there, onto that ledge, we stay quiet and still, and maybe, they'll follow the horse and ride right past us. And if they don't, then we're about to have a very short, very violent conversation. Ryder checked his revolver, counting rounds. 6 shots. Not enough if things went bad. Never enough. They climbed. Ryder went first, his wounded shoulder screaming with every movement, his fingers finding holds in rock that crumbled at the touch. Twice he nearly fell. Twice Caleb caught him, steadied him, kept him moving. By the time they reached the ledge, a narrow shelf of stone about 15 feet above the riverbed, Ryder's vision was swimming with pain and exhaustion. He collapsed against the rock face, breathing hard, tasting blood where he'd bitten through his lip. Caleb settled beside him, pulling a small revolver from his pack that Ryder hadn't known he had. You know how to use that? Ryder whispered. Point and shoot, right? More or less. They pressed themselves flat against the rock, making themselves as small as possible, and waited. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Voices called back and forth, men coordinating their search, professional and thorough. Check that overhang! Already did. Nothing. Fresh tracks heading north. Horse was moving fast. Think they spooked when they heard us coming? Probably. Come on, they can't be far. The posse thundered past below them. Ryder counted 8 riders, all armed, all looking determined and well-equipped. Marshal Harding led them, his face set in grim concentration. They rode north, following the tracks left by the horse, disappearing around a bend in the riverbed. Ryder and Caleb waited, neither moving, barely breathing. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then, faintly from the north. Found the horse! No riders! More shouting, confused and angry. The sounds of men arguing about which way the fugitives had gone. Ryder allowed himself a small smile. The ruse had worked. For now. How long before they come back? Caleb whispered. Hour, maybe. Once they realize the horse was a decoy, they'll double back and search more carefully. So we need to be gone in less than an hour. We need to be gone in less than 20 minutes. They descended carefully, every movement deliberate and silent. When they reached the ground, Ryder retrieved the saddle and gear they'd hidden. Now what? Caleb asked. We're on foot, wounded, and they're going to figure out our trick soon. Ryder looked west toward a line of low hills that marked the edge of the Badlands. Beyond them was territory he knew, rough country with caves and canyons and places a man could disappear if he was smart about it. We walk, he said. Stay low, stay quiet, and put as much distance as possible between us and this riverbed before they come back. Walk. With your shoulder. You got a better idea? Caleb looked at him for a long moment, then hoisted the pack onto his shoulders and picked up the saddle. Let's go, he said. They moved west, staying in the lowest ground they could find, using every scrap of cover. Ryder's shoulder was on fire, and each step sent jolts of agony through his body, but he kept moving. Stopping meant capture. Capture meant hanging. Simple math. Behind them, the sounds of the posse grew louder again. They were coming back, just as Ryder had predicted. Faster, he urged. You can barely walk. Then I'll crawl. Move! They broke into an awkward run, Caleb supporting Ryder with one arm while carrying the saddle with the other. The hills seemed impossibly far away. The ground between them and safety was open and exposed. Any moment now, someone would look west, would spot them, would raise the alarm. Any moment. They were still 50 yards from the nearest hill when someone shouted, "There! West side! I see them! Run!" Ryder shoved Caleb forward. "Don't stop! Don't look back! Just run!" Gunfire cracked behind them. Bullets kicked up dirt, whining through the air. The posse was giving chase now, their horses eating up the distance. They'd never make it. The math was simple and brutal. Men on foot couldn't outrun men on horseback. But Ryder ran anyway, his body screaming, his vision tunneling, every breath like swallowing fire. Caleb stayed with him, refusing to leave him behind even though the kid could have made it alone. The hills loomed closer. 30 yards. 20. A bullet caught the saddle Caleb was carrying, punching through leather and stuffing. The kid stumbled but didn't fall. 10 yards. They hit the hills and plunged into a narrow canyon between two rock faces. The walls rose on either side, closing out the sky, turning the morning into twilight. Behind them, horses' hooves clattered on stone. The posse was following them in, abandoning their mounts to pursue on foot through the tight passage. "This way!" Caleb darted left, following a branching path that climbed steeply upward. They scrambled over loose rocks, their hands bleeding, their lungs burning. The canyon walls pressed close enough to touch on both sides. A dead end loomed ahead, a sheer rock face with no way up, no way forward. Trapped. Ryder turned, bringing his revolver up, his hand steady despite everything. Behind them, the first posse member appeared, rifle raised. "It's over, Vance!" Marshal Harding's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Throw down your weapon!" Ryder aimed at the marshal's chest, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then Caleb grabbed his arm. "Wait," the kid said. "Look!" He pointed at what Ryder had taken for solid rock, actually a narrow opening, barely visible in the shadows, a crack in the stone just wide enough for a man to squeeze through sideways. "Go," Ryder said. "I'll hold them off. Together or not at all." Caleb was already pushing him toward the opening. "Move!" Ryder squeezed through the crack, the rock scraping his chest and back, his wounded shoulder catching on stone and sending lightning bolts of agony through his entire body. For a horrible moment, he thought he was stuck, wedged in place, about to be shot like a fish in a barrel. Then he popped through into a space beyond. A hidden chamber maybe 20 feet across, lit by a shaft of sunlight from a crack in the ceiling high above. Caleb followed, moving through the opening with the ease of someone half Ryder's size. As soon as he was through, he grabbed a loose boulder and jammed it into the crack from their side. "That won't hold them long," Ryder said. "Doesn't have to. Look." On the far side of the chamber, another opening, this one larger, sloping downward into darkness. "A cave system," Caleb said. "I've heard about these. The Badlands are full of them. Some go on for miles." Shouts echoed from the other side of the blocked opening. Someone tried to push through, cursed when the boulder wouldn't budge. "Bring axes! We'll chop our way through if we have to!" Ryder and Caleb exchanged glances. "Into the dark it is," Ryder said. "Into the dark," Caleb agreed. They descended into the cave, leaving daylight behind, entering a world of stone and shadow where the only sounds were their breathing and the drip of water somewhere in the depths. Behind them, the sounds of axes on rock echoed like distant thunder. But they were moving forward now, deeper into the earth, into territory where pursuers would have to follow blind. And in the darkness, Ryder Vance smiled. Maybe they'd survive this after all. The darkness swallowed them whole. Ryder's hands found the cave wall, rough stone that scraped his palms as he moved forward, one careful step at a time. Behind them, the sound of axes on rock grew fainter, muffled by layers of earth and stone, until it became nothing more than a distant rhythm, like a heartbeat dying. "Can you see anything?" Caleb's voice came from somewhere to Ryder's left, close but invisible in the absolute black. "Nothing. You?" "Not even my own hands." A pause, then the sound of rustling fabric. "Wait, I've got matches in my pack." The scratch of sulfur on stone, and then light bloomed, small and fragile, but bright as the sun after the suffocating darkness. Caleb's face appeared in the flickering glow, his eyes reflecting the flame like a wolf's. They stood in a tunnel, perhaps 6 feet wide and tall enough to walk upright if you didn't mind occasionally scraping your head. The walls were limestone, smooth in places where water had carved them over centuries, rough in others where the rock had simply fractured and fallen away. The floor sloped downward at a gentle angle, disappearing into shadows beyond the reach of the matchlight. "We can't stay here," Ryder said. "They'll follow once they break through that boulder." "I know. But we need to see where we're going, or we'll break our necks in the dark." Caleb looked at the match burning down toward his fingers. "I've got maybe 20 matches. After that, we're blind." "Then we better make them count." They moved deeper into the cave system, Caleb leading with the match held high, Ryder following with one hand on the wall for balance. His shoulder had gone from screaming pain to a dull, nauseating throb that made him dizzy. Blood was seeping through the bandages again. He could feel the wetness spreading across his shirt. The tunnel branched, then branched again. Each time they chose the path that seemed to lead deepest into the earth, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and their pursuers. The match burned down to Caleb's fingertips. He dropped it with a hiss and struck another one. "How many is that?" Ryder asked. 3. 17 left. The math was simple and brutal. They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. The tunnel twisting and turning, sometimes narrowing to shoulder-width passages that they had to squeeze through sideways, sometimes opening into chambers large enough to echo with their footsteps. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a steady percussion that marked time when time had lost all meaning. On the 7th match, they found the underground river. The tunnel opened suddenly into a cavern so large the matchlight couldn't reach the ceiling. The sound of rushing water filled the space, and when Caleb moved the flame closer to the ground, they could see it. A river maybe 15 feet wide, moving fast and dark, disappearing into a tunnel on the far side of the chamber. "We can follow it," Caleb said. "Rivers always lead somewhere." "Yeah, usually to waterfalls and drowning." "You have a better idea?" Ryder didn't. His shoulder was getting worse by the minute, and the blood loss was starting to make him lightheaded. They needed to find a way out soon, or he'd pass out and become dead weight the kid would have to abandon. They followed the river's edge, moving carefully over slick rocks that could break an ankle with one wrong step. The sound of water masked any noise from behind them. If the posse had entered the caves, they'd have no warning until it was too late. The 8th match died. Caleb struck the 9th. "Ryder," he said quietly, "you're bleeding pretty bad." "I know." "We need to stop. Let me look at it." "Look at Poltat. We need to keep moving." "You're going to pass out." "Not yet, I'm not." But Ryder's voice sounded distant, even to his own ears, and when he looked down at his feet, they seemed very far away, like he was viewing them from the top of a tall building. The river curved sharply to the left, and the tunnel narrowed again, forcing them to walk single file along a ledge barely wide enough for one person. Below, the water churned white and angry over rocks that would break a man into pieces. Halfway across, Ryder's vision grayed out completely. He felt himself falling, felt the world tilting sideways, felt nothing under his feet but air and the promise of cold water and sharp stones. Then Caleb's hand locked around his good arm, yanking him back against the wall with strength that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size. "I've got you," the kid said, his voice steady despite the strain. "I've got you. Just breathe." Ryder breathed. The world slowly resolved itself back into shapes and shadows, and the tiny circle of matchlight that was all that stood between them and the absolute dark. "Thanks," he managed. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this." Caleb guided him forward, one careful step at a time, his hand never leaving Ryder's arm. "Just a little further. There's another chamber ahead. I can hear the echo changing." He was right. The ledge widened, the tunnel opened up, and they found themselves in a space that felt vast even if they couldn't see its boundaries. The river spread out here, becoming shallow and wide, its surface reflecting the matchlight like scattered diamonds. "We can rest here," Caleb said. "Just for a minute." They sat on a shelf of dry stone above the waterline. Caleb struck match number 11. They were burning through them faster than Ryder had hoped, and examined the shoulder wound in the wavering light. The stitches are torn again. All of them this time. His face was grim. This is going to get infected if we don't clean it properly. Add it to the list of problems. Ryder, I'm serious. You could die from this. I could die from a lot of things right now. Infection's not even in the top 5. Ryder leaned his head back against the stone, closing his eyes. How many matches left? 9. Maybe 8 if this one burns down while we're talking. Not enough. Not nearly enough to get them out of this maze. Tell me something, Ryder said, keeping his eyes closed. Why'd you really help me? And don't give me that line about wanting to be seen. There's more to it than that. In the silence that followed, the only sound was the river and their breathing and the soft hiss of the match burning. My father, Caleb said finally, his voice quiet. He was a card sharp. Worked the riverboats and mining camps, making money off men who thought they were smarter than him. He was good at it, really good. What happened to him? Got caught cheating in a game in Deadwood. The men he'd been playing with dragged him out into the street and beat him to death while half the town watched. Caleb's voice stayed flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a newspaper. I was 6 years old. Watched the whole thing from my mother's arms while she screamed for someone to help him. Ryder opened his eyes. In the matchlight, Caleb's face was expressionless, but his eyes held something dark and old. Nobody helped, the kid continued. Nobody even tried. They said he deserved it for being a cheat. Said he had it coming. And my mother, she believed them. Spent the rest of my childhood telling me to keep my head down, stay quiet, don't draw attention, be invisible. So you stopped talking. So I learned that being seen gets you killed. Being invisible keeps you breathing. Caleb looked at him directly. But you know what I figured out watching all those years? Being invisible is just another kind of death. Slower, quieter, but death all the same. The match burned down to his fingers. He dropped it, and darkness rushed back in like a flood. You asked why I helped you, Caleb said from the blackness. I helped you because when I saw you in that cell, I saw myself. Both of us already dead as far as the world was concerned. Both of us with nothing left to lose. We've got plenty to lose. Our lives, for starters. Are they lives worth living if we're spending them being what other people think we are? Ryder had no answer for that. Caleb struck another match. Number 12. The light pushed back the darkness again, fragile and temporary. Come on, he said. We need to keep moving. The river has to lead out eventually. They walked for another hour, or maybe 3 hours, or maybe 10 minutes. Time had ceased to have any meaning in the caves. The matches burned down one by one. 14, 15, 16. And then when Caleb struck match number 17 and they both knew it was one of the last, they heard it. Voices. Behind them, maybe a quarter-mile back, echoing through the tunnels. Men calling to each other, coordinating their search. They got through, Ryder said, or found another entrance. Caleb cupped his hand around the match, trying to hide its light. Either way, they're in the caves now. Can we outrun them? Not with you bleeding and me carrying all the gear, and not in the dark. The match went out. Caleb struck the 18th, his hand steady despite everything. How many left? Ryder asked, though he already knew. 2, 3 if this one's a dud, and I have to relight. 2 matches between them and blindness. Between them and being caught or getting lost forever in the dark. Ryder's mind raced, calculating odds the way he used to calculate the layout of a bank before a robbery. They needed an advantage, a way to turn the tables, something nobody would expect. The river, he said suddenly. How deep is it here? Caleb moved the match closer to the water's edge. Maybe 3 feet, 4 at most. Fast current, though. Why? Because they're expecting us to keep running, to go deeper into the caves trying to find a way out. Ryder's eyes followed the water as it flowed past them. What if we go back? Back toward the posse? Not toward them, past them. We get in the water, let the current carry us back the way we came. They'll be moving forward into the caves, and we'll float right past them in the dark. Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking it through. That's insane. You have a better idea? No.
which is the only reason I'm not telling you how insane it is. The kid looked at the water, then at Ryder. You can barely walk. You think you can hold your breath and swim in the dark with a bullet wound? I can do whatever I have to do.
We've established that already. The voices behind them were getting closer. Ryder could make out individual words now, individual voices. Harding's bark of command, Cooper's nervous responses. Match, Caleb said, and the darkness claimed them again. They moved to the water's edge. Even without light, Ryder could hear the current, feel the cold air rising off it, smell the mineral tang of deep earth and stone. When we get in, we stay together, Caleb said. Hold on to my belt if you have to. If we get separated in the dark, we won't. If we get separated, meet at the surface. Find your way out however you can. I'm not leaving you behind. And I'm not watching you drown trying to save me. Caleb's hand found Ryder's in the darkness, gripped it once, hard. Promise me. If something happens, you save yourself. Ryder wanted to argue, but the voices were very close now, maybe just a few turns of tunnel away. Light flickered against the cavern walls, the orange glow of torches painting dancing shadows. I promise, he lied. Liar, Caleb said, but there was something like fondness in his voice. Come on, before they spot us. They waded into the river, and the cold hit Ryder like a physical blow. His wounded shoulder screamed as the water soaked through the bandages, probably washing away whatever clotting had formed. The current grabbed at their legs, insistent and strong. Ready? Caleb asked. No, do it anyway. They pushed off together, letting the river take them, the current pulling them downstream, back toward the entrance, back toward the men hunting them. The water was shockingly cold, so cold it made Ryder's chest seize up, made breathing difficult. He kicked weakly with his legs, trying to keep his head above water, his good arm locked around Caleb's shoulder. The darkness was total, absolute, worse than being blind because at least blind men knew where the ground was, knew which way was up. Here, there was only the rush of water and the cold and the certainty that one wrong move would mean drowning in the dark with no one to hear you die. Light bloomed ahead, torches, many of them, reflecting off the water and the cavern ceiling. Voices echoed loud now, close enough to distinguish individual speakers. Spread out! Check every chamber! Marshal, we've been down here for hours. Maybe they found another way out. They didn't. They're down here somewhere, probably dead or dying. We just need to find the bodies. Ryder and Caleb drifted closer, the current carrying them inexorably forward. Ryder could see them now, 6 men with torches spread across the cavern, checking behind rocks and peering into side tunnels. They were going to drift right through the middle of them. Caleb's hand found Ryder's, squeezed once, a signal. Then he pulled them both under. The cold water closed over Ryder's head, and the world became pressure and darkness, and the thundering of his own heartbeat in his ears. His lungs burned. His shoulder was liquid fire. Every instinct screamed at him to surface, to breathe, but Caleb's hand held him down and he trusted it. They drifted beneath the torchlight, shadows moving through shadows, invisible beneath the surface. Ryder's vision started to gray out, from blood loss or oxygen deprivation, he couldn't tell. His chest felt like it was going to explode. His mouth wanted to open, to gulp in water and drown rather than endure another second of this suffocating darkness. Then they were past the light, and Caleb pulled them up. Ryder's head broke the surface and he gasped, trying not to make sound, trying not to give them away. Water streamed from his hair, his clothes, his wounds. He could taste blood in his mouth. Behind them, the voices continued their search, oblivious. Nothing here, Marshal. Keep looking. They couldn't have just disappeared. But they had. They disappeared into the darkness and the water and the blind faith. That sometimes the craziest plan is the only one that works. The current carried them onward, away from the searchers, back toward the entrance chamber where daylight waited. Ryder's strength was fading fast now. The cold and the blood loss were catching up to him, making his limbs heavy and unresponsive. Stay with me, Caleb urged, his voice barely above a whisper. Just a little further. I can see light ahead. He was right. A gray glow was visible in the distance, growing brighter as they drifted closer. Daylight. The entrance. Freedom. The current grew stronger as the tunnel narrowed, pulling them faster. Too fast. Ryder caught a glimpse of white water ahead, rocks protruding from the river like broken teeth. "Rapids!" he managed to gasp out. "Hold on!" They hit the first rock hard enough to drive the air from Ryder's lungs. He lost his grip on Caleb, felt the current tear them apart, felt himself tumbling over and over in the churning water. His head cracked against stone. His shoulder exploded in fresh agony. Then he was airborne, thrown clear of the water, flying through space. He had time to think this is how it ends before he hit the pool below with an impact that drove everything from his mind except white-hot pain and the certainty that he was drowning. Strong hands grabbed him, dragged him towards something solid. His face broke the surface and he sucked in air that tasted like copper and river water and blood. "Breathe," Caleb's voice said from somewhere very far away. "Come on, Ryder, breathe," he breathed. The world slowly came back into focus, blurry and wrong, but there. They were in the entrance chamber, the one where they'd first squeezed through the crack in the rock. Daylight streamed through the opening above, painfully bright after so long in darkness. "The posse," Ryder croaked. "Still back in the caves, looking for us in all the wrong places." Caleb was checking him over, his hands gentle but efficient. "You're a mess. That shoulder's torn wide open again. You've probably got a concussion from hitting your head, and you're bleeding from about 6 places I can see. But I'm alive." For now. Caleb helped him sit up, supporting his weight. "Can you climb?" Ryder looked at the crack in the rock 15 feet above them, then at his ruined shoulder, then back at Caleb. "Can I climb?" he repeated. "Kid, I can barely breathe." "Then I'll help you, but we need to move before they realize we doubled back." Caleb was already pulling rope from his pack, waterlogged but intact. "I'll tie this around you, climb up first, then pull you up after me." "That's not going to work." "It's going to have to." Caleb's eyes met his, fierce and determined. "We didn't drown in that river and survive rapids in the dark just to give up now. So you're going to let me tie this rope around you, and you're going to use whatever strength you have left to help me get you out of this cave. Understand?" Ryder wanted to argue, wanted to tell the kid to save himself, to leave the wounded outlaw behind and make a run for it. Wanted to say a lot of things. Instead, he just nodded. Caleb worked fast, securing the rope around Ryder's chest in a harness that wouldn't slip. Then he scrambled up the rock face like a spider, finding handholds and footholds that seemed impossible, moving with the confidence of someone who'd spent his youth climbing things he wasn't supposed to. In less than a minute, he'd reached the crack in the ceiling and squeezed through. "Ready?" his voice called down. "As I'll ever be." The rope went taut. Ryder pushed with his legs, grabbed at the rock with his good hand, and felt himself being hauled upward inch by painful inch. His shoulders shrieked, his head spun. Twice, his grip slipped and he swung free, dangling from the rope while Caleb held his entire weight from above. But the kid didn't let go, didn't waver, just kept pulling, steady and relentless, until Ryder's hand found the edge of the crack and he could haul himself through and collapse on solid ground under open sky. For a moment, he just lay there, staring up at clouds and blue sky and a sun that seemed impossibly bright. His body was done, finished. Every part of him hurt in ways he hadn't known were possible. But he was alive. They were both alive. "We need to keep moving," Caleb said, but gently, like he understood that moving might be beyond Ryder's capabilities right now. "They'll figure out we came back this way eventually." "I know." Ryder forced himself to sit up, the world tilting dangerously before righting itself. "Help me up." Caleb pulled him to his feet, and they stood there for a moment in the canyon where this had all started, where they'd been trapped against a dead end that wasn't a dead end at all. The saddle they'd abandoned was still there, along with Caleb's pack. The kid shouldered both, then looped Ryder's good arm over his shoulders. "Where to?" he asked. Ryder looked around, getting his bearings. They were maybe 3 miles from Copperhead Falls, too close to be safe. East was open country where they'd be spotted immediately. West led deeper into the Badlands, more caves and canyons and places to hide, but also places to die of thirst or exposure. North was the only option that made any sense. Rough country that led eventually to the town of Junction City, 40 miles away. A week's travel for a healthy man. Twice that for someone in Ryder's condition. But it was away from the posse, away from the immediate danger, and right now, that was all that mattered. "North," he said, "toward Junction City. That's a long walk." Then we better get started. They walked. One foot in front of the other, Caleb supporting most of Ryder's weight, both of them soaked and bleeding and exhausted beyond measure. The sun climbed higher, turning the Badlands into an oven, baking them dry even as it baked the strength from their bodies. Ryder's vision kept trying to gray out. He'd shake his head, force himself to focus, keep moving. One step, another, another. Caleb never complained, never suggested they stop and rest, just kept walking, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Hours passed. The sun reached its zenith and began its descent. They found shade under an outcrop of rock and collapsed there, both of them too tired to speak. Water, Ryder finally managed. Caleb produced a canteen from his pack. They'd had two, but one had been lost in the river. The remaining canteen was maybe a third full. Enough for a day, maybe two if they were careful. Not enough to reach Junction City. They passed it back and forth, each taking small sips, making it last. "You need to change those bandages," Caleb said. "That shoulder's going to get infected for sure if you don't." "Later." "Now, before it gets worse." Too tired to argue, Ryder let the kid strip off his shirt and peel away the waterlogged bandages. The wound looked bad. Angry red, seeping blood and clear fluid, the stitches torn completely out in several places. Caleb cleaned it as best he could with their limited water supply, then used strips torn from his own shirt to create fresh bandages. His hands were steady, practiced, gentle. "Where'd you really learn to do this?" Ryder asked.
"I told you, watching the doc work on people at the boarding house. There's more to it than that." Caleb was quiet for a moment, tying off the last bandage. "When I was 12, a drifter came through town. Got in a knife fight, took a bad cut to his leg.
Nobody would help him. He was just another nobody passing through. So I helped him. Cleaned the wound, stitched it up like I'd seen Doc Patterson do. He survived. Taught me a few things before he moved on." "What kind of things?" "How to read people. How to stay invisible. How to survive when the world doesn't give a damn if you live or die." Caleb sat back, examining his work. "That'll hold for a day or two. After that, you need a real doctor. Add it to the list." They rested until the sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. Then they forced themselves up and continued north, moving through the twilight, putting more distance between themselves and Copperhead Falls. Night fell, and with it came the cold. Desert country was like that, brutal heat during the day, bitter cold at night. They had no fire, no blankets, nothing but each other's warmth and the determination to survive. They walked until Ryder literally couldn't take another step, until his legs simply gave out and he collapsed on the hard ground. Caleb managed to drag him to a sheltered spot between two rocks before his own strength failed. They huddled together in the darkness, shivering, listening to coyotes howl in the distance. "You think they're still looking for us?" Caleb asked. "Probably. Harding's not the type to give up easy." "Good." Ryder turned his head to look at the kid's profile in the starlight. "Good? I want them to keep looking. I want them to waste their time and resources chasing ghosts. I want them to know we beat them." Caleb's voice was quiet but fierce. "And when we get to Junction City, when we're safe and healed up, I want to make them regret ever underestimating us. That's a tall order for two fugitives with no money, no supplies, and a collective bounty that's probably doubled by now. So we get creative." Caleb pulled the saddle closer, using it as a pillow. "You're the famous outlaw. Tell me how to rob a bank." Ryder laughed. Couldn't help it, even though it hurt his shoulder and made his head pound. "You want to rob a bank? Why not? We're already wanted for jailbreak and evading arrest. Might as well make it worth the trouble." "Kid, I've robbed 12 banks. You know how many of those robberies went smoothly?" "How many?" 2. Every other time something went wrong. Someone got hurt. Money got left behind. Posies showed up faster than expected." Ryder closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. "Bank robbery isn't glamorous. It's terrifying and usually stupid. But it works sometimes. Sometimes, if you're smart and lucky and willing to walk away if things go sideways. So teach me. We've got nothing but time right now." And so,
There in the cold darkness of the Badlands, with death maybe a day or two away, Ryder Vance began teaching Caleb Rowe how to rob a bank. He talked about timing and planning, about knowing your exits and counting the guards, about staying calm when the whole world was screaming and bullets were flying. He talked until his voice gave out, and then Caleb asked questions until dawn began to paint the eastern sky with light. They walked again, moving slower now, Ryder's strength failing with each mile. The wound in his shoulder was hot to the touch, infection setting in despite Caleb's best efforts. Fever made everything feel distant and unreal, like he was walking through a dream. By the second day, he was delirious. Caleb kept him moving somehow, half carrying him when necessary, talking to him constantly, keeping him focused on the next step, the next mile, the next hour. Stay with me, Ryder, just a little further. Can't. You can. You're the famous Ryder Vance, remember? The man who walked out of a Kansas City jail, the outlaw who survived a bullet to the shoulder and drowning in a week in the Badlands. You're not dying out here. Famous, Ryder mumbled. Joke. Everyone knows it. Everyone's wrong. I've seen what you can do, what you've survived. That's not a joke. That's not pathetic. That's strength. Caleb's voice was fierce, cutting through the fever haze. So you're going to keep walking, and we're going to make it to Junction City, and we're going to prove every single one of them wrong. Why do you care? Because you're the only person who ever saw me as something more than invisible, the only one who looked at me and saw potential instead of a burden. Caleb's arm tightened around Ryder's waist, supporting his weight. You gave me a chance. I'm returning the favor. They walked. On the third day, when Ryder was more unconscious than not, when the water was gone and the sun was a hammer trying to beat them into the ground, Caleb saw it. Smoke on the horizon. Not the smoke of wildfire, but the thin gray column of chimney smoke. Civilization. Maybe Junction City, maybe a ranch, maybe just a lined shack with a well and a roof. But something. Hope in the form of smoke. Almost there, Caleb said, though Ryder probably couldn't hear him anymore. Just hold on a little longer. We're almost there. The smoke grew closer, resolved itself into buildings. A town, Junction City. They staggered down the main street just after sunset, two filthy, wounded figures that looked more dead than alive. People stopped and stared. A woman gasped. Someone shouted for a doctor. Caleb held Ryder upright through sheer willpower, his own vision swimming, his own strength nearly spent. We need help, he said to the crowd gathering around them. His voice came out as a croak. My friend's been shot. He needs a doctor. Who are you? Someone asked. Caleb looked at them, these strangers in a strange town, and made a decision. Name's Caleb Rowe, he said clearly, his voice stronger now. And this is Ryder Vance. We need help, and we can pay. It was a lie. They had no money. But sometimes lies bought you the time you needed to figure out the truth. Someone, a man with kind eyes and a doctor's bag, pushed through the crowd. Get him to my office, he said. Quickly now, before he bleeds out in the street. They carried Ryder between them, Caleb and the doctor and a couple of townspeople who'd decided to help. They laid him on a table in the doctor's office, and the old man began cutting away the filthy bandages. Infection, he muttered. Bad. How long's he been like this? 3 days, Caleb said. Got shot escaping from... He caught himself just in time. Got shot escaping from jail would end this real quick. Escaping from some men who wanted him dead, he finished. We've been walking through the Badlands, no proper supplies. The doctor gave him a long look, like he knew there was more to the story but wasn't going to push. Yet. You said you could pay. Yes, sir. How? Caleb reached into his pack and pulled out the one thing of value he'd managed to hold on to through everything. His father's pocket watch, silver and engraved, the only thing he had left of the man who'd been beaten to death in a street while people watched. This should cover it, he said, setting it on the table. The doctor picked it up, examined it, nodded. This'll do. Now get out of my way and let me work. Caleb stepped back, letting the professional take over. Through the window, he could see more people gathering outside, curious and suspicious. News would spread fast in a town this size. Questions would be asked. They had maybe a day, maybe less,
before someone recognized Ryder's name or face from a wanted poster, before the law came calling again. One day to rest, to heal, to plan their next move. Caleb sank into a chair and let exhaustion take him, his last conscious thought that they'd made it this far against impossible odds. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it a little further. Ryder woke to the smell of carbolic acid and the sound of voices arguing in hushed tones just beyond his hearing. His mouth tasted like something had died in it, and when he tried to move, his shoulder sent up a flare of pain that made his vision white out for a moment. But it was different pain than before. Sharper, cleaner somehow. The deep, nauseating throb of infection was gone, replaced by the honest ache of a wound that was actually healing. He forced his eyes open. The room was small, neat, with whitewashed walls and a single window showing darkness outside. Night then. But which night? How long had he been unconscious? Easy now. A weathered hand pressed gently against his chest, keeping him from sitting up. The doctor, an old man with white hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering to be shocked by anything, leaned into view. "You've been out for 2 days. Don't go undoing my work by thrashing around." 2 days? Ryder croaked. His throat felt like sandpaper. "You had a fever that would have killed most men. The infection in that shoulder was bad enough to warrant amputation, but your young friend there wouldn't hear of it." The doctor nodded toward the corner of the room. Caleb sat slumped in a chair, asleep with his head tilted back against the wall, his face gaunt with exhaustion. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. "He's barely left your side," the doctor continued, helping Ryder take a sip of water from a tin cup. "Wouldn't let me amputate, wouldn't leave even to eat properly. Just sat there and watched you like if he looked away, you'd die out of spite." "Stubborn kid? Takes one to know one, I'd wager." The doctor set the cup aside. "I'm Doc Harlan, by the way. And you're Ryder Vance, which means I'm harboring a fugitive in my office and probably going to hang for it when Marshal Harding catches up to you." Ryder's hand moved instinctively toward where his gun should have been. "Nothing. Of course not. Relax," Doc Harlan said. "If I was going to turn you in, I'd have done it 2 days ago when the sheriff came by asking if I'd seen any strangers in town. I told him no. I'm a doctor, not a bounty hunter. My oath says I treat whoever needs treating, outlaw or saint. Not many people live by their oaths anymore. Not many people are worth saving anymore either. But that boy over there thinks you are, and I've learned to trust young men with old eyes. They see things the rest of us miss." Before Ryder could respond, Caleb stirred, his eyes snapping open with the alertness of someone who'd learned to sleep light and wake fast. He saw Ryder conscious, and something that might have been relief flickered across his face. "You're awake," he said, standing up too quickly and swaying before catching himself on the wall. "And you look like death," Ryder replied. "When's the last time you ate?" "I've been eating." He's been eating scraps and refusing anything more substantial," Doc Harlan interjected. "Says he needs to save money for supplies. I told him the pocket watch he gave me would have covered a month of good meals, but he won't listen." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He crossed to Ryder's bedside, his eyes scanning the bandaged shoulder with practiced assessment. "The infection's gone," Doc Harlan confirmed. "I packed the wound with honey and golden seal, drained the poison, stitched it up proper. He'll have a nasty scar, but he'll keep the arm." "Thank you," Caleb said quietly. "Thank me by getting out of Junction City before someone less principled than me recognizes your faces." The doctor moved toward the door. "I'll give you two some privacy, but make it quick. You need to be gone before sunrise." After he left, silence settled over the room like dust. Caleb stood by the bed, his hands clenched at his sides, his expression unreadable. "You gave him your father's watch," Ryder said finally. "It was just a watch. It was all you had left of him. And you were dying." Caleb's voice was flat, emotionless. Between a dead man's watch and a living friend, the choice was pretty clear. Friend. The word hung in the air between them, significant in ways neither of them acknowledged. "How bad is it out there?" Ryder asked, changing the subject because friendship was a luxury fugitives couldn't afford. Caleb pulled a newspaper from his coat pocket, 2 days old, creased from being folded and unfolded repeatedly. He tossed it onto Ryder's lap. The headline made Ryder's blood run cold. "Ryder Vance escapes. massive manhunt underway. Below it, a subheading that was somehow worse. Outlaw takes hostage in daring jailbreak. Young man's life in danger. Ryder read the article, his jaw tightening with every word. According to the paper, he'd kidnapped Caleb at gunpoint during the escape, threatened to kill him if pursued, and was now holding him captive somewhere in the Badlands. The town of Copperhead Falls was offering a $500 reward for Caleb's safe return, and Marshal Harding had promised to bring Ryder in dead or alive. Preferably dead. "They think I kidnapped you," Ryder said. "Better than the truth. If they knew I helped you willingly, my mother would be arrested as an accomplice. This way, she's just the worried mother of an innocent victim. $500 is a lot of money. Someone's going to recognize us eventually. Which is why we leave tonight." Caleb pulled a small cloth bag from his pocket and dropped it on the bed. It clinked with the sound of coins. $73 and change. I sold the saddle, the pack, everything we had except 2 horses, ammunition, and basic supplies. "Where'd you get the horses?" "Same place we got the first ones. Borrowed them from people who won't notice they're gone for a while." Caleb's expression didn't change. "We've got maybe 6 hours before someone puts the pieces together and realizes the wounded stranger Doc Harlan's been treating matches your description. After that, this town's going to get very unfriendly very fast." Ryder tried to sit up, and this time the doctor's warning be damned, he pushed through the pain until he was vertical. The room spun for a moment, then steadied. "Can you ride?" Caleb asked. "I can do whatever I have to do." "You keep saying that. One of these days it's going to stop being true." "But not today." Ryder swung his legs off the bed, his feet finding the floor. Someone had cleaned him up. His clothes were gone, replaced with borrowed trousers and a rough cotton shirt. His gun belt hung on a chair nearby. "Where are we headed?" "Silverton. It's a mining town 3 days north, big enough that 2 strangers won't draw immediate attention. We can disappear there, figure out our next move." "And our next move is?" Caleb met his eyes directly. "We rob a bank. A real one this time, with planning and precision, and none of the mistakes that got your gang killed in Copperhead Falls. We get enough money to disappear properly. New names, new lives, maybe head to California, or up into Canada, where the law's reach is shorter. That's a hell of a plan for a kid who was nobody a week ago." "I'm not nobody anymore." Caleb's voice was hard, certain. "And neither are you. We're not jokes. We're not victims. We're survivors, and we're going to prove it." There was steel in those words, a determination that bordered on desperation. Ryder recognized it because he'd felt it himself, burning in his chest during those long days in the Copperhead Falls jail. "All right," he said. "Silverton it is. But we do this smart. No rushing in, no improvising. We plan every detail." "Agreed." They gathered the few supplies Caleb had managed to acquire. 2 canteens, dried meat, ammunition for Ryder's revolver, and the small pistol Caleb carried. Doc Harlan returned just as they were preparing to leave, his arms full of bandages and a bottle of laudanum. "For the pain," he said, handing the bottle to Caleb. "Use it sparingly. And change those dressings every day. Keep the wound clean. If it starts to smell bad or the fever comes back—" "I know," Caleb interrupted. "Thank you, Doc. For everything." The old man studied them both for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed and shook his head. "I was young once. Thought I could outrun my mistakes, make something of myself despite everything working against me. Took me 20 years and a dead wife to learn that running only works if you're running toward something, not just away." He looked at Ryder. "Whatever you boys are planning, make sure it's worth the price you're going to pay." They left through the back door, moving through Junction City's darkened streets like ghosts. The town slept around them, unaware that 2 of the territory's most wanted men were walking past their windows. The horses waited where Caleb had left them, tied behind a livery stable, saddled and ready. Good animals again, sturdy and fresh. Ryder was beginning to suspect the kid had a real talent for acquiring things that didn't belong to him. They mounted up and rode north, leaving Junction City behind as the first hints of dawn began to pale the eastern sky. The 3 days to Silverton passed in a blur of hard riding and rough camping. Ryder's shoulder improved daily, the infection purged, and the wound closing properly under Doc Harlan's expert stitching. By the 3rd day, he could move the arm without wanting to scream, though it would be weeks before he had full strength back. They avoided towns, stuck to game trails and old mining roads, kept their eyes on the horizon for any sign of pursuit. At night, they made cold camps and took turns on watch, speaking little but growing comfortable with the silence between them. On the fourth morning, Silverton appeared in the distance, a sprawling collection of buildings clustered around the base of a mountain, smoke rising from a dozen mines worked around the clock. The town had that raw, chaotic energy of a place where fortunes were made and lost daily, where everyone was too busy chasing silver to pay much attention to their neighbors, perfect for two fugitives who needed to disappear. They rode in just after noon, joining the flow of miners, merchants, and opportunists that crowded Silverton's muddy streets. No one gave them a second glance, just two more drifters in a town full of people running from something. Caleb had been right. They could disappear here. They found a boarding house on the edge of town, cheap, anonymous, run by a widow who cared more about payment in advance than about names or backgrounds. Caleb paid for a week using their dwindling funds, and they settled into a small room with two narrow beds and a window that looked out on an alley full of trash. "Home sweet home," Ryder muttered, dropping onto one of the beds. "It's temporary. Once we have money, we can afford better." Caleb was already studying a map of the town he'd acquired somewhere. There are 3 banks in Silverton: the Territorial Trust, the Miners Bank and Loan, and the Silver Mountain Savings and Security. "You've been busy." "I've been watching, listening, learning the layout." Caleb pointed to the map. "The Territorial Trust is the biggest, handles most of the mining payrolls. Security's tight, 3 guards, vault that would take dynamite to crack, and the Territorial Marshal's office is right across the street. So we skip that one. The Miners Bank is smaller, less security, but also less money, mostly handles small accounts and personal savings, not worth the risk. Which leaves the Silver Mountain. Caleb's finger tapped the location on the map. Medium size, handles business accounts and some mining company funds. 2 guards, decent vault, but manageable. And it's on the far end of town, away from the marshal's office. We hit it right. We could be gone before anyone organizes a proper pursuit." Ryder studied the map, his mind falling into old patterns, calculating angles, timing, escape routes. This was what he'd been good at, back before everything went wrong in Copperhead Falls. Planning the impossible and pulling it off through a combination of nerve and precision. "When's the best time?" he asked. "Friday afternoon. That's when the mining companies deposit their weekly receipts. The vault will be fullest, and the town will be busy with miners getting paid and spending their money. Chaos works in our favor." "Friday's 3 days away, which gives us 3 days to plan every detail, watch the guards' routines, memorize every exit and contingency." Caleb rolled up the map. "You taught me in the Badlands. The key to a successful robbery is knowing more than everyone else in the room. We're going to know everything." And they did. For 3 days, they watched the Silver Mountain Savings and Security like hawks studying prey. They learned that the morning guard was young and nervous, prone to checking his pocket watch every few minutes. They learned that the afternoon guard was older, more experienced, but had a bad knee that slowed him down. They learned that the manager kept a Derringer in his desk drawer but had never fired it in his life. They learned the layout of the building, where the vault was, where the teller windows were positioned, which door led to the alley out back. They timed how long it took for someone to run from the bank to the marshal's office. They identified 3 separate escape routes and memorized every turn and alley along each one. By Friday morning, Ryder felt confident for the first time since the disaster in Copperhead Falls. This could work. This could actually work. They spent the morning preparing, checking weapons, laying out fresh clothes that wouldn't draw attention, going over the plan one final time. "We walk in at 2 o'clock, Caleb said, his voice calm and methodical. "You cover the room, I handle the vault. Manager's going to try for his gun. You stop him before he reaches the desk. Anyone tries to be a hero, we fire a warning shot, but we don't kill unless absolutely necessary." "Agreed. We take only what we can carry in the saddlebags, 30 pounds maximum, mostly large bills. We're not there to empty the vault, just to get enough for a fresh start." "How long do we have?" 3 minutes from the time we announce ourselves until the first lawmen arrive. 4 if we're lucky. That's how long it took during the test runs." Ryder raised an eyebrow. "Test runs?" "I timed how long it takes someone to get from the bank to the marshal's office, raise the alarm, and for armed men to respond. 3 to 4 minutes, depending on who's on duty. Caleb checked his pistol one final time. We need to be on horses and moving 90 seconds after we walk out that door. And if something goes wrong? We improvise, carefully. At 1:30, they left the boarding house and made their way to the bank, moving separately, meeting up a block away. Ryder's heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. This was what he knew. This was what he was good at. 2 o'clock came. They walked into the Silver Mountain Savings and Security side by side, their faces calm, their movements deliberate. The bank was moderately busy, 5 customers conducting business at the teller windows, the manager at his desk going over papers, the afternoon guard standing near the door with his hand resting on his holstered pistol. Ryder and Caleb moved to the center of the room. Then everything happened very fast. Ryder drew his revolver in one smooth motion, the weapon coming up to point at the ceiling. "Nobody move!" His voice cut through the ambient noise like a knife. "This is a robbery." The guard's hand moved toward his gun. Ryder swung the revolver to cover him. "Don't. I'm faster than you, and I don't want to prove it." The guard froze, his hand still inches from his weapon. Caleb was already moving toward the vault, his own pistol out, his movements quick and efficient. One of the customers, a woman in an expensive dress, started to scream. Caleb pointed his gun at the ceiling and fired once. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The woman's scream cut off abruptly. "Everybody on the floor!" Caleb's voice was hard, commanding, nothing like the quiet kid who'd been invisible back in Copperhead Falls. "Hands where we can see them." People dropped, some quickly, some hesitantly. The manager's hand started to slide toward his desk drawer. "I wouldn't," Ryder said, his gun tracking the movement. "Whatever you're reaching for isn't worth dying over." The manager's hand stopped, retreated. He raised both hands slowly. "Smart man," Ryder said, then louder. "You in the vault. Open it. Now." The teller inside the vault, a thin man with spectacles, fumbled with the mechanism, his hands shaking so badly he could barely work the combination. "Faster," Caleb urged, moving closer. "We don't have all day." The vault swung open. Caleb disappeared inside and emerged 30 seconds later with 2 canvas bags stuffed with cash. He tossed one to Ryder, who caught it one-handed. "Time?" Ryder asked. 1 minute 40 seconds since we came in. "Then we're done. Everybody stays on the floor for 5 minutes after we leave. Anyone gets up before that, we start shooting through the windows. Understand?" Heads nodded. They backed toward the door, guns covering the room. So far, everything had gone exactly according to plan. No heroes, no shooting, just a quick, clean robbery that would give them enough money to disappear properly. They were halfway to the door when it burst open. 3 men entered. Not lawmen, but rough-looking characters with guns already drawn and bandanas covering their faces. The O'Malley gang. Ryder recognized them from wanted posters, a crew of thugs who specialized in claim jumping and strong-arm robberies. What the hell were they doing here? The leader, Seamus O'Malley himself, identifiable by his distinctive red hair even with the bandana, stopped short when he saw Ryder and Caleb. For a moment, everyone just stared at each other. Then O'Malley started laughing. "Well now," he said, his Irish accent thick. "Looks like someone beat us to it." "That your haul, boys." "Our haul," Ryder confirmed, his gun steady. "Find your own bank." See, that's the funny thing. O'Malley's 2 companions spread out, flanking their leader. "We were planning to rob this bank today. Had it all scheduled and everything. And here you are, doing our job for us." "Tough luck. We got here first." "Which means you've done all the hard work and we just need to take those bags off your hands." O'Malley's gun came up, pointing at Ryder's chest. "So, how about you set them down nice and gentle, and we all walk away from this breathing?" The math was simple. 3 against 2. O'Malley's crew had the door blocked. The people on the floor were starting to realize that with 2 sets of robbers arguing, maybe this was their chance to run or fight back. The whole situation was seconds from turning into a bloodbath. Ryder's mind raced. Options, angles, ways out. Then Caleb did something unexpected. He fired, not at O'Malley, but at the ceiling right above the manager's desk. The bullet struck a gas lamp that had been burning low, and suddenly fire bloomed across the ceiling as burning oil splashed onto wood and paper. "Fire!" someone screamed. Chaos erupted. People scrambled up from the floor, running for the exits. The guard went for his gun. O'Malley's crew tried to grab the fleeing customers, and suddenly the bank was a mass of bodies and smoke and confusion. Caleb grabbed Ryder's arm and yanked him toward the back door, the one they'd scouted, the one that led to the alley. They burst through it as flames began to crawl across the ceiling inside, the fire spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Behind them, gunshots rang out. O'Malley's crew shooting at the guard shooting back, bullets flying wild. Their horses waited in the alley, reins tied to a post. They mounted up as shouting erupted behind them. People fleeing the burning bank, the O'Malley gang emerging from the smoke, the whole town suddenly mobilizing. "Ride!" Caleb shouted. They rode, the money bags secured to their saddles, heading for escape route number 2, the one that led north through the mining camps and into the hills. Behind them, Silverton erupted into chaos. The bank was burning. Shots were still being fired. Someone was screaming for the fire brigade. The marshal's office would be responding to reports of armed robbers, a fire, and general mayhem. And somewhere in all that confusion, the O'Malley gang would be trying to explain why they were in a burning bank with guns drawn. Ryder looked at Caleb as they galloped through the mining camps, his expression somewhere between shock and admiration. "You set the bank on fire." "I created a distraction by setting the bank on fire." "Would you rather I shot O'Malley? That would have started a gunfight that killed everyone in the room." Caleb's face was set, determined. "This way, everyone's focused on the fire and each other. We got away clean, and the O'Malley gang's gonna take the fall for the whole thing." It was insane. It was reckless. It was brilliant. They rode hard for 2 hours before finally slowing to rest the horses. Behind them, no pursuit was visible. Everyone in Silverton was probably too busy dealing with the fire and the O'Malley gang to mount an organized chase. They stopped in a grove of aspen trees, their hands shaking with adrenaline, and checked the money bags. $4,000. More than enough for new identities, passage to California, a fresh start. "We did it," Caleb said, his voice filled with something like wonder. "We actually did it." "You did it," Ryder corrected. "That fire trick. Where'd you learn that?" "I didn't. I just saw the opportunity and took it." Caleb looked at the money, then at Ryder. "Is this what it feels like? After a successful robbery? Usually there's more celebrating and less being chased by the law. But yeah, something like this." Ryder counted out the bills, dividing them into stacks. "We need to keep moving. Put distance between us and Silverton before someone connects the dots." They rode until sunset, then made a cold camp in the hills. No fire. The smoke would give away their position. Just dried meat and water, and the satisfaction of having pulled off something impossible. That night, as Ryder took first watch, he thought about how far they'd come. A week ago, he'd been a joke dying in a jail cell. Now he was a bank robber again, with money in his pockets and a future that wasn't just a noose. And Caleb, the invisible kid who nobody saw, had just proven himself more resourceful and dangerous than most outlaws twice his age. The newspapers would probably blame everything on Ryder. The jailbreak, the robbery, the fire. They'd say he corrupted the innocent hostage, turned him into a criminal. They'd be wrong. Caleb had made his own choices, taken his own risks. Nobody had forced him into any of this. But that didn't mean there wouldn't be consequences. 2 days later, they reached a small town called Red Bluff and bought a newspaper from a vendor who barely looked at them. The headline made Ryder's blood run cold. "Comanche Caleb strikes, bank robbed and burned in daring daylight raid." He read the article twice, his jaw tightening with every word. According to the paper, the robbery had been masterminded by a dangerous outlaw known only as Comanche Caleb, a cunning criminal who'd set fire to the bank as a distraction while making off with thousands in stolen money. Witnesses described him as cold, calculating, and ruthless. Ryder Vance was mentioned only in passing, as Caleb's hostage, forced to help with the robbery at gunpoint, a pathetic has-been being used by a younger, smarter criminal. "Comanche Caleb," Ryder said, handing the paper to Caleb. The kid read it, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he started to smile. "They think I'm the mastermind." Apparently, and I'm just your hostage. How does that feel, being nobody's second choice? Ryder thought about it, about how it should bother him, how his pride should be wounded by being written off as a sidekick to a kid half his age. Instead, he started laughing. Feels like freedom, he said. They're looking for Comanche Caleb now, not Ryder Vance, which means we can disappear properly. Caleb's smile widened. You're not angry? Why would I be angry? You earned it. That trick with the fire was pure genius. If they want to make you the legend, let them. Legends draw attention, and attention's the last thing we need. They burned the newspaper and rode on, heading west toward California and whatever waited there. Behind them, the territory erupted with wanted posters for the dangerous outlaw Comanche Caleb and his unfortunate hostage. And for the first time since everything had gone wrong, Ryder Vance felt like he'd found something worth holding on to. Not a reputation, not a gang, but a partnership with someone who saw the world the same twisted way he did. Someone who understood that survival meant being smarter than everyone else, faster than the law, and willing to set the whole world on fire if that's what it took to stay free. They made it as far as the Colorado border before the bounty hunters found them. Ryder spotted them first, 3 riders cresting a ridge about a mile back, moving with the purposeful pace of men who knew exactly what they were tracking. He and Caleb had been following a dry creek bed west, keeping to low ground, avoiding settlements, but apparently not carefully enough. We've got company, Ryder said, his hand moving to his revolver. Caleb turned in his saddle, his eyes finding the distant figures immediately. How long have they been following us? Hard to say. Could be they picked up our trail in Red Bluff. Could be they've been tracking us since Silverton. Ryder studied the terrain ahead, rocky hills offering decent cover but no clear escape route. Either way, they're not going to give up easy. 3 men means serious bounty hunters, not amateurs looking for quick cash. The reward on Comanche Caleb is up to $1,500 now. Saw it on a poster 2 towns back. Caleb's voice was calm, but his hand rested on his pistol. That's $500 each if they bring me in. More if they bring me in dead. They're not bringing you in at all. They urged their horses into a faster pace, the animals sensing their riders' urgency. Behind them, the bounty hunters matched their speed, closing the distance with the patience of men who'd done this before. The chase lasted through the afternoon, a deadly game of cat and mouse across terrain that grew progressively rougher. Ryder's shoulder ached with every jarring step the horse took, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. Stopping meant fighting, and fighting 3 professional killers when you were already exhausted was suicide. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and copper, they found themselves trapped in a box canyon with walls too steep to climb and only one way out, back the way they'd come, where the bounty hunters were waiting. Well, Caleb said, dismounting and checking his ammunition, this is less than ideal. Ryder laughed despite the situation. That's one way to put it. He swung down from his horse, his legs nearly buckling when they hit the ground. 3 days of hard riding had taken its toll. How many rounds you got? 12. You? 18. Ryder did the math quickly. 30 rounds between them, 3 targets, plenty of ammunition if every shot counted. Not nearly enough if things turned into a prolonged gunfight. The bounty hunters appeared at the canyon entrance, silhouetted against the fading light. They dismounted 50 yards away, spreading out to present multiple targets, their rifles already in hand. Ryder Vance! The voice belonged to the man in the middle, tall, broad-shouldered, with a marshal's badge glinting on his chest. Not just bounty hunters, then. Actual law. This is Deputy Marshal William Crane. You're surrounded. Surrender the boy and yourself, and nobody needs to die today. Surrounded by 3 men, Ryder muttered to Caleb. That's optimistic. They've probably got more coming, Caleb replied, his eyes scanning the canyon walls. Standard tactics, send the first team to pin us down while reinforcements circle around. Where'd you learn about tactics? Same place I learned everything else, watching and listening. Caleb moved to a position behind a large boulder, his pistol aimed at the canyon entrance. So what's the play? Ryder's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. They could try to shoot their way out, low odds of success, high odds of getting killed. They could surrender, which meant a trial followed by hanging for Caleb and himself both. They could try to negotiate, but you couldn't negotiate with men who'd already decided you were worth more dead than alive. Or they could do what they'd been doing since this whole mess started, something nobody would expect. You trust me? Ryder asked. Caleb glanced at him, something like amusement flickering across his face. Haven't we established that by now? Then follow my lead. Ryder raised his voice, calling out to the deputy marshal. Crane, I want to negotiate. Nothing to negotiate, Vance. You're wanted for jailbreak, robbery, kidnapping, and arson. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands up. See? That's the problem. Ryder kept his gun ready, but his tone conversational. I didn't kidnap anybody. Check your facts. The kid helped me escape willingly. And the robbery in Silverton? That was his idea, not mine. A pause from the canyon entrance. Crane conferred with his men in voices too low to hear. What are you doing? Caleb hissed. Making them doubt their information. If they think you're the mastermind instead of the victim, it changes their approach. Ryder raised his voice again. Ask him yourself. Ask Comanche Caleb who planned the Silverton job. Another pause, longer this time. Then Crane called back, The boy's a hostage. We know Vance is using him. I'm not a hostage, Caleb shouted, and Ryder could hear the anger in his voice, real anger, not performance. And my name's not the boy. I'm Caleb Rowe, and I set that bank on fire because it was the smartest play available. Ryder's here because I broke him out of jail, not the other way around. The silence from the canyon entrance was profound. Ryder grinned. The kid was a natural at this, mixing truth with just enough defiance to make it believable. You're saying, Crane called back, his voice uncertain now, that you helped Vance escape? That you robbed the bank willingly? I'm saying I made my own choices, Caleb shouted back. Every single one. And if you're planning to hang us, you better bring enough men, because we're not going quietly. Another long pause. Ryder could imagine the conversation happening 50 yards away, Crane and his men trying to reconcile the wanted posters with what they were hearing, trying to figure out if the innocent victim they'd been hired to rescue was actually a criminal more dangerous than the famous outlaw. Then Crane made his decision. Last chance, he shouted. Surrender in the next 60 seconds or we come in shooting. That went well, Caleb muttered. Better than you'd think. We just bought ourselves time. Ryder was already moving, checking the canyon walls more carefully. There, a narrow crack in the stone about 20 feet up the western wall, barely visible in the fading light, but climbable if you were desperate enough. Can you make that climb? He asked Caleb, pointing. Caleb studied it, his expression dubious. Maybe. Where does it lead? No idea. But it's got to be better than a gunfight against professional lawmen. 30 seconds! Crane's voice echoed off the canyon walls. Make your choice! They moved fast, leaving the horses behind. No way to bring them up that climb. Ryder went first despite his wounded shoulder, his fingers finding holds in rock that crumbled at the touch, his boots scraping for purchase. Every muscle screamed protest, but he climbed because the alternative was death. Caleb followed, moving with that same spider-like grace he'd shown in the caves, his slight build an advantage here where Ryder's bulk was a liability. Below, Crane's countdown reached 0. Time's up! Move in! Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the canyon walls, the bounty hunters advancing cautiously into the box canyon. They'd be at the boulder where Ryder and Caleb had been positioned in seconds. Ryder hauled himself over the lip of the crack and into a narrow passage barely wide enough for a man. Caleb came up behind him, breathing hard. Keep moving, Ryder urged. The passage led upward at a steep angle, turning and twisting through the rock. Behind them, shouts of confusion echoed up. The bounty hunters discovering their quarry had vanished. They went up! Check the walls! Ryder and Caleb climbed faster, the passage growing narrower until they had to move sideways, their backs scraping one wall while their chests pressed against the other. It was like being buried alive, and for a horrible moment Ryder thought they'd get stuck, wedged in stone until they died of thirst or starvation or simply gave up and put a bullet in their own heads to end it. Then the passage opened up, and they emerged onto a ledge high above the canyon floor. The view was spectacular, the canyon spreading out below them, the desert beyond painted in sunset colors, the distant mountains purple against the darkening sky. The bounty hunters were tiny figures far below, searching the canyon floor for tracks that didn't exist. They'll figure it out eventually, Caleb said, gasping for breath. But not today. By the time they organize a proper search of the canyon walls, we'll be miles away. Ryder looked around, getting his bearings. The ledge led to a ridge that ran north along the canyon rim, rough going on foot, but navigable. They walked through the night, putting distance between themselves and the box canyon. No food, no water, no horses, just the money in their pockets and the clothes on their backs and the knowledge that they'd escaped death once again by the slimmest of margins. Dawn found them exhausted and dehydrated but alive, overlooking a small settlement nestled in a valley below. Smoke rose from chimneys. Voices carried faintly on the morning air. Civilization, and with it the possibility of supplies, rest, and news. "We need to be careful," Ryder said. After that confrontation with Crane, word's going to spread fast. Every lawman in 3 territories is going to be looking for Comanche Caleb and his hostage. So we changed the story. Caleb's eyes were thoughtful, calculating. If they're looking for an outlaw and his victim, we become something else. Brothers, maybe. Prospectors down on our luck. Nobody important. Can you play nobody after being famous for a week? Caleb's smile was sharp. I played nobody for 18 years. I think I can manage a few more days. They descended into the valley, 2 anonymous drifters in a land full of them. In the settlement, barely large enough to call a town, just a general store, a blacksmith, and a handful of houses, they bought supplies with careful discretion, asking no questions and offering no information. The storekeeper was a talkative woman with sharp eyes and too much curiosity. "You boys look like you've had a rough time of it," she said, tallying their purchases. "Where you headed?" "West," Ryder said vaguely. "Looking for work." "Mining work?" "Whatever pays." She studied them both, her gaze lingering on Caleb. "You wouldn't happen to be that Comanche Caleb fellow, would you? The one all the posters are about?" Ryder's hand moved toward his gun, but Caleb laughed. A genuine, easy sound that completely changed his appearance. "Me? I wish. Heard that Caleb fellow made off with thousands. I can barely afford beans and coffee." He gestured at their meager supplies. "Do I look like a criminal mastermind?" The woman's suspicion wavered. Caleb did look young, harmless, more like a down-on-his-luck kid than a dangerous outlaw. "I suppose not," she admitted. "But you be careful out there. They say Comanche Caleb's somewhere in this territory, and he's supposed to be real dangerous. Killed 3 men in Silverton, burned down half the town." "3 men?" Caleb's eyebrows rose. "I heard it was 5, and the whole town burned, not just half." "Well, you know how stories grow in the telling." She bagged their supplies. "That'll be $4.30. They paid and left, not speaking until they were well clear of the settlement. "Killed 3 men, Caleb said quietly. "I didn't kill anyone." Legends never match reality. The stories always get bigger, bloodier, more dramatic. Ryder glanced at him. "That bother you?" "Should it?" "Probably. But I stopped caring about what should bother me about 5 years ago." They walked west for 3 more days, buying horses in a town where nobody asked questions and paying extra for the discretion. The money from the Silverton job was lasting longer than Ryder had expected. Caleb's insistence on frugality meant they could stretch their funds for months if necessary. But money wasn't their biggest problem. Their biggest problem was the net closing around them. Every town had wanted posters now. Every sheriff and marshal and deputy in the territory had descriptions. The reward for Comanche Caleb had climbed to $2,000, and the reward for his hostage, Ryder Vance, dead or alive, with preference for dead, had hit $1,500. They were famous, infamous, and fame was the most dangerous thing an outlaw could have. On the 7th day after escaping the Box Canyon, they reached the California border and stopped at a creek to water the horses and refill their canteens. "We made it," Caleb said, staring at the imaginary line that separated territories. "California. New start, like we planned." "New start requires new identities," Ryder replied. "And new identities require people who can forge documents, which requires money we're going to run out of eventually. So we pull another job." "In California? Where nobody knows Comanche Caleb yet? Where we could actually disappear properly?" Ryder shook his head. "That's how you turn a fresh start into another manhunt." "Then what do you suggest? We can't run forever." Ryder had been thinking about this for days, turning the problem over in his mind like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. They needed to disappear, but they couldn't disappear as long as wanted posters followed them everywhere. They needed their legends to die, but legends didn't die easily, unless you gave them a death dramatic enough to be believed. "I have an idea," he said slowly, "but you're not going to like it. I didn't like breaking you out of jail or setting a bank on fire either. Hasn't stopped me yet." Ryder told him the plan. Caleb listened without interrupting, his expression growing more incredulous with every detail. When Ryder finished, Caleb was silent for a long moment. "That's insane," he said finally. "I know. It'll probably get us killed. Probably. And if it works, everyone will think we're dead anyway, which defeats the purpose." "Not everyone. Just the people who matter." Ryder met his eyes. "We can keep running, keep looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next Deputy Marshal Crane to corner us in another box canyon. Or we can end this on our terms, kill the legends, and actually live the quiet lives we've been pretending to want." Caleb stared at the water, his reflection rippling in the current. Then he looked up, and there was something fierce and determined in his eyes. "Tell me exactly what we need to do." They spent 2 weeks preparing, moving carefully through small towns, gathering specific supplies and spreading specific rumors. They let slip in saloons that Comanche Caleb was planning something big. They made sure people overheard that Ryder Vance had escaped his captor and was hunting the young outlaw for revenge. They created a story so compelling that newspapers picked it up and ran with it, building anticipation for a confrontation everyone knew was coming. And then they picked the place where that confrontation would happen, a ghost town called Redemption, abandoned 5 years ago when the silver ran out, now nothing but empty buildings and desert wind. Perfect for what they needed. They rode into Redemption 3 days before the deadline they'd set in their rumors, using the time to prepare the scene. Ryder positioned himself in the old saloon, visible through the windows. Caleb set up in the building across the street, also visible. 2 legends, finally facing each other. And then they waited for the audience to arrive. They came in droves. Journalists from 3 territories, lawmen hoping to catch both outlaws in one place, bounty hunters attracted by the combined $4,000 reward, even ordinary citizens who'd heard the stories and wanted to witness history. By the appointed day, Redemption had a population of over 200, all gathered to watch Comanche Caleb and Ryder Vance kill each other. The sun reached high noon. Ryder stepped out of the saloon, his hand near his gun. Across the street, Caleb emerged from the building he'd occupied, his young face set in hard lines. The crowd hushed, pressing back to give them room, eager for the violence they'd been promised. "Vance!" Caleb's voice carried across the empty street. "You've been hunting me for 2 weeks. Well, here I am." "You burned that bank and made me look like a fool," Ryder shouted back, playing his part perfectly. "You're going to pay for what you've done." "I did what I had to do to survive, just like you taught me." "I taught you nothing. You were my hostage, a tool I used and threw away." The insults flew back and forth, each one carefully scripted, designed to build the narrative the crowd expected. The famous outlaw and his former victim finally settling their score. They drew their guns simultaneously. Gunfire erupted, not aimed at each other, but at specific targets they'd prepared in advance. Windows shattered, wood splintered. One of the old buildings, the one they'd secretly filled with kindling soaked in kerosene, erupted in flames as their bullets found the marks. The crowd gasped, surged forward, then back as the fire spread impossibly fast. Ryder and Caleb kept shooting, kept moving, creating chaos and confusion. Smoke billowed across the street, thick and black, reducing visibility to almost nothing. And in that smoke, they ran, not at each other, but toward the building they'd prepared behind the saloon, the one with the escape tunnel they'd spent 3 days digging. Behind them, the crowd surged forward, trying to see through the smoke, trying to witness the end of the legendary confrontation. They found bodies. 2 drifters they'd paid handsomely to wear similar clothes and lie very still in the smoke. The drifters had been promised $50 each for an hour's work. They'd probably make 10 times that selling their story to the newspapers. Ryder and Caleb crawled through their tunnel, emerging a quarter-mile away where fresh horses waited, bought under false names, prepared for exactly this moment. They rode west, fast and hard, putting distance between themselves and Redemption while the town burned and the crowd searched the smoke for bodies that would never be found. By nightfall, the newspapers were already composing their headlines. By the next morning, those headlines spread across the territory. Comanche Caleb and Ryder Vance dead, killed each other in redemption shootout. The stories were lurid, dramatic, full of details that had been embellished by witnesses who'd seen exactly what they wanted to see. 2 outlaws, both dead in the flames. Justice served. Legends ended. The wanted posters came down within a week. The bounties were officially declared closed. Deputy Marshal Crane published a statement saying that while no bodies had been recovered from the fire, witness testimony and evidence at the scene confirmed both men had perished. The hunt was over. Ryder and Caleb made it to San Francisco 3 weeks later. Their hair cut short, their appearances changed, their names different. They found work. Nothing glamorous, just honest labor that paid enough to rent a small room and buy food. For the first time in months, they could walk down a street without checking over their shoulders, could sleep without one of them keeping watch, could exist as normal people instead of legends. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt strange, hollow, like putting on clothes that didn't quite fit. They lasted 6 weeks before the restlessness set in. "This is what we wanted," Caleb said one evening, sitting on the steps outside their boarding house, watching the sun set over the bay. "Quiet life. Nobody hunting us. Nobody knowing who we are." "I know," Ryder replied. "So why does it feel wrong?" Ryder didn't answer immediately. He'd been asking himself the same question, turning it over in his mind, trying to understand why freedom felt like a different kind of prison. "Because we're not built for quiet," he said finally. "We're built for survival, for improvising and taking risks and being smarter than everyone trying to kill us. Take that away. And what's left? A normal life. Isn't that supposed to be the goal? For most people, maybe, but we stopped being most people the moment you broke me out of that jail." Ryder looked at him. "You ever regret it? Any of it?" Caleb thought about the question seriously, his eyes distant. Then he shook his head. "No. I'd rather have 3 months of actually living than a lifetime of being invisible." He stood up, brushing dust from his pants. "So what do we do? We can't go back to being outlaws. We're officially dead." "But nobody knows we're dead," Ryder said slowly, an idea forming. "Comanche Caleb and Ryder Vance are gone. But there's nothing stopping 2 completely different people from making their own way in the world. You want to start over, completely. I want to use what we learned, the planning, the strategy, the ability to see 3 moves ahead of everyone else." Ryder's eyes met his. "We could hire ourselves out, help people with problems that need creative solutions, things that aren't quite legal but aren't quite criminal either." Caleb's expression shifted, something like interest flickering across his face. "You're talking about becoming fixers." "I'm talking about using our talents for something besides running and hiding. We got good at surviving. Maybe we could get good at helping other people survive too. It wasn't a perfect plan. It wasn't even a particularly good plan. But it was something, a direction to move in that wasn't just aimless drifting." They started small, helping a shopkeeper recover stolen goods from a gang that had been extorting him, work that involved more planning than violence. Then a rancher who needed evidence of cattle rustling that the local sheriff was ignoring. Then a widow trying to prove her husband had been murdered, not killed in an accident as the mining company claimed. They worked quietly, efficiently, using the skills they'd developed during their time as fugitives. Planning, observation, understanding people and systems and how to manipulate both. And slowly, carefully, they built something new. Not a legend, not a reputation. Just 2 men who could solve problems nobody else wanted to touch, who asked few questions and delivered results, who disappeared back into anonymity once the job was done. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined. It wasn't glory or fame or the dramatic ending their legends had received, but it was honest work in its own twisted way, and it was theirs. 5 years passed. The frontier changed around them. Territories becoming states, wild towns growing into cities, the railroad bringing civilization and law and order. The era of outlaws and desperados was ending, replaced by something more structured and less free. Ryder Vance would have been 40 by then, though the name meant nothing anymore. The man who'd once been Ryder went by Jack Morrison now, a consultant who helped resolve disputes and locate missing items, and occasionally bent the law without quite breaking it. Caleb Rowe had become Cal Rhodes, his 23rd year approaching, his reputation for discretion and problem-solving spreading through certain circles that operated just outside the law's reach. They still worked together when the job required it, though they'd both taken on independent projects as well. They were partners, not just in crime, but in something more difficult to define: mutual respect born from shared survival, friendship forged in circumstances that should have killed them both. On a spring morning that felt like it belonged in a different lifetime, they sat in a San Francisco cafe drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. Caleb, Cal now, had grown into his frame, the boyish uncertainty replaced by quiet confidence. Ryder's, Jack's, shoulder still ached when it rained, but the scar had faded to a thin white line, a reminder of how close he'd come to dying in a jail cell. "Says here," Cal remarked, not looking up from the paper, "that they're making a book about the outlaws of the Old West. Chapter dedicated to Comanche Caleb." "What's it say?" "That I was a ruthless killer who murdered 6 men in cold blood before dying in the redemption fire at the tragically young age of 19. Cal's mouth quirked. "They made me a year younger. Apparently 19's more tragic than 20. "Did they get anything right?" "They spelled my name correctly. That's about it." Cal folded the paper and set it aside. "You ever miss it, being Ryder Vance?" Jack, it was easier to think of himself that way now, after 5 years, considered the question. "I miss the clarity," he said. "When you're running for your life, decisions are simple. Survive or die. No complicated middle ground. And now? Now everything's complicated middle ground. But I'm alive to experience the complications, which beats the alternative." Cal nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. They'd traded legend for life, fame for anonymity, and most days that felt like the right choice. Most days. "There's a job," Cal said, changing the subject. "Came through this morning. Railroad executive being blackmailed by someone with evidence of corruption. Needs the evidence retrieved without involving authorities. Tricky. Very. But it pays well, and we've done trickier." Cal's eyes held that familiar glint, the one that said he'd already figured out 3 different approaches to the problem. "You interested?" Jack drained his coffee, feeling the familiar pull of challenge, the call to use his brain for something besides ordinary existence. "Tell me more," he said. They spent the morning planning, their voices low, their minds sharp, doing what they'd learned to do best, seeing problems nobody else could solve and finding solutions nobody else would think of. Outside the cafe window, San Francisco went about its business, oblivious to the 2 men who'd once been legends, who'd chosen survival over fame, who'd forged themselves into something new from the ruins of who they used to be. The frontier was dying, but they were still alive. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. The newspapers had gotten one thing right in their sensational accounts of Comanche Caleb and Ryder Vance. They were legends. But legends didn't need to be real to have power. They just needed to be believed. And while the world believed the legends were dead, the men who'd created them were free to live. Not as heroes, not as villains, just as survivors who'd learned that sometimes the best way to win was to let everyone think you'd lost, to disappear so completely that no one thought to keep looking, to trade glory for the simple, profound freedom of being nobody special in a world that had moved on without you. They finished their coffee, paid their bill, and walked out into the San Francisco morning with plans to rob a blackmailer and help an executive avoid scandal, not because they were good or evil, but because they were good at it, and being good at something was reason enough. Behind them, the cafe buzzed with ordinary conversation. Ahead of them, the city spread out in all its complicated promise, and somewhere between what they'd been and what they'd become. Ryder Vance and Caleb Rowe had found something neither of them expected. Not redemption, that was too clean, too easy, but purpose. And for 2 men who'd started with nothing but a jail cell and desperate hope, purpose was more than enough. The frontier had taught them to survive. They'd taught themselves to live. And that was the story the newspapers would never tell. The one about 2 legends who'd chosen to become men instead, who'd walked away from fame and found something better in the anonymous freedom of tomorrow. It wasn't the ending anyone expected, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect.